refused to engage with the Americans if they were to be fronted by Jared Kushner, the son-in-law of Donald Trump, or even the Middle Eastern envoy Steve Witkoff, which is when Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, and JD Vance, the Vice President, were brought in. Will Marco Rubio be there on Friday? We'll have to see, but you could very much expect Steve Witkoff to make a return, because in the week that's gone by, Steve Witkoff, of course, has been doing back-channel communications. Even what we at CNN have been picking from our sources within Iran, we've been told that yes, indeed, they have a direct back-channel communication line opened with the Americans. Is it Steve Witkoff? We do not know, but perhaps diplomacy has done its job over here in bringing in this big point of ceasefire. Will it hold or not? The fulcrum right now is the Strait of Hormuz, and much of the global markets, remember, Akash, depend on this. We are being told that the markets have already started responding positively to this big announcement. The Dow, we are being told, has shown, in fact, winds of change. It's responding much positively over here. We'll await how Indian markets, when they open, how they respond to this big development. But we've seen how the entire global economy was coming to a screeching halt. But the Strait of Hormuz finally has arrived as that big economic, strategic, and diplomatic leverage for the Iranians. Akash?
Oh yes, Akanksha. First of all, who is going to lead, and if at all, we are going to see President Donald Trump. There is a possibility, given the fact that he has been at the forefront, starting from 28th of February. He has, in fact, announced every next thing that is going to happen or that is happening in the war. So possibly, there is a possibility that on 10th of April, if not, by physically appearing in Islamabad, there is a possibility that he is going to take charge, and he is somewhere going to lead the negotiation. One. Secondly, as far as other members are concerned, we know, of course, JD Vance and Marco Rubio were there in the initial team too. Just a while back when both the sides had given their agenda, their plan, the 15-pointer plan from US and the 10-pointer plan from Iran. At that point in time, in fact, the team that was very much announced by the US president, he of course said that I am there, I can of course negotiate. It doesn't mean that, if I'm the president, it doesn't mean that I cannot participate in the negotiation. He very much mentioned it in the press conference. But this time around, if or not he is going to, lead the negotiations is something that we'll wait and watch for. But there are possibilities. Other than that, Akanksha, Islamabad, of course, on 10th of April, we are anticipating this particular meeting. But then this particular window, these 2 days are going to be important, because these 2 days will somewhere decide if or not the ceasefire is going to hold. Of course, a Strait of Hormuz is one condition, and US president has mentioned it categorically that how this is one condition that will somewhere decide whether or not they are pausing their sort of activities that are happening. Energy infrastructure, of course, they are not targeting for now, is what we are anticipating, given the fact that they have reached some sort of deal or some sort of mediation. But then, US president has categorically mentioned that how it's a conditional ceasefire, given that Iran has to open the Strait of Hormuz. On the other hand, Iran also has accepted that they are going to open the Strait of Hormuz, for these 2 weeks when, for the time being, especially when, they have got this ceasefire for next 15 days. And in these 15 days, they are going to further negotiate on the sort of terms that they are going to have. On 10th of April, Akanksha, we are anticipating this sort of negotiation that will, in fact, happen in Islamabad. And after which we can expect that, in fact, direction, would be decided as to in which direction both the sides are going, Akanksha.
Crude is plummeting. It's down 20% to $91.05. It's the biggest drop since COVID, is what we are being told. And it was at $117.63 at today's high. We'll break this whenever. Now, we in fact also quickly go across to some inputs that are coming in right now. But this is the big breaking input that we are right now bringing in for all our viewers, that The crude has plummeted down by 20%. This is exactly what we were talking about, that the markets are going to respond fiercely. And in fact, they indeed are, because it's the biggest drop that one has noticed in terms of the gap that you see, because it was all the way up to $117 a barrel. It's gone, in fact, sharply down all the way from 117 to $91.5 a barrel. This is, in fact, if you look at it, over nearly $20 per barrel is what you're looking at. This is the biggest drop that we've seen ever since COVID times. This was the impact of the war on the global markets as well. So we'll have to, in fact, see how Indian markets also start responding. You can, in fact, expect that effect to rub off on the Indian market, but such is the impact of this overall war. The markets have started reacting sharply to this ceasefire announcement, and it will bring the markets back to a buoyant sort of space. But for how long is that going to be? We do not know right now. Also, if the ceasefire holds, but markets have, in fact, indeed reacted positively over here. The big takeaway is that this is a drop that you're looking at all the way from over 117 coming down to 91.5, because remember, it was roughly around $80 to $85 a barrel, and during the war it went up to 118, even $120 a barrel, and that has been one of the sharpest rises. And today what's being reported is one of the sharpest drops ever since COVID times, that it's come down to 91.5, all the way up from $117 a barrel. That's the big breaking input. We await how Indian markets are going to now respond to this. But I quickly want to go back to Akash on that point that we were talking about, how the US Congress now is also responding right now, because US Congress has already started highlighting that by saying yes to the ceasefire proposal by Iran, the US president has also made a cataclysmic decision by saying yes to Iran having control over the Strait of Hormuz. And that is indeed becoming a bone of contention for both sides. We've been discussing about it, but what will be the domestic impact of this? Because remember, there's also domestic pressure on the US president, given that he's staring at the lowest approval ratings ever, which is perhaps also one factor that could have pushed the US president into signing up for the ceasefire, given that the midterms are going to be taking place this year, and there's much riding on his own domestic position. The US Congress, including his own Republicans, the MAGA base, have in fact been dissatisfied because nobody had foreseen the kind of spendings that are taking place, the military spendings, because of this war. And so the word already coming in, Akash, is that signing up for what the Israelis are proposing is going to be cataclysmic.
Oh yes, Akanksha, in fact,
Okay, we'll try and reconnect with Akash over there. But the big news, of course, right now is that the US and Iran both have, in fact, signed up for that ceasefire. It's important to highlight that it's a 2-week truce. This is the gateway to peace, not the destination itself. But will the ceasefire even hold, given the kind of history we've seen of ceasefires, whether it is Gaza or Ukraine? It all depends on whether Iran is going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, because that's a big tactical leverage that has finally jumped to the rescue of Iran. At the same time, the negotiations are looking like a possibility, with the Pakistan Prime Minister, in fact, announcing that the US president could also be presiding over that. We do not know, but negotiations are happening on Friday in Islamabad, is the indication coming in from the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. He's also being lauded by the US president. The word coming in is that China also weighed in on the last moment, because remember, these are countries in the Asian subcontinent which are bearing the direct brunt of the energy crisis. China happening to be one of the heavily energy reliant economies, as is India. And so for the Strait of Hormuz to be reopened is going to be significant for the entire Asian subcontinent. Most of our energy supplies were coming from this Strait of Hormuz. And so the word coming in from the Iranian foreign minister, the readout that has been shared by the US president over there, talks about how Abbas Araghchi has indeed indicated that with coordination with the forces, they will look towards reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Now, there's another interesting aspect of this entire Iranian leadership. Ever since the elimination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, what we've been able to pick up is that there is a sense of, there's also a rift, or there are different outlooks in the way the IRGC is operating and the way the Iranian leadership is operating. When you see the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, and even the Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, both of them are viewed as moderate figures. The IRGC is of the view that they are very much into this war now, and they could very well continue to keep fighting. And they are, in fact, the formidable, intimidating force right now, which is bringing the US to its knees. Now, will the IRGC cooperate with this proposal? Will they be cooperating with the Iranian leadership? Because remember, the word coming in from Iran is of the foreign minister. Of course, the Iranian Supreme Council also has given a nod to the ceasefire proposal. We shouldn't forget that the word that's coming in is that Mojtaba Khamenei, who is currently in an incapacitated condition, has also given a green signal to this ceasefire proposal. He has much clout and command over the IRGC. The Supreme Council does. So if the Supreme Council indeed has given a nod to the ceasefire proposal, we can expect the IRGC also to be in alignment with the decision that the current Iranian leadership has taken. But how the markets are going to react is going to be very interesting to watch out for. The next 48 hours, today and tomorrow, are going to be very interesting, even more so if the peace talks do indeed take place in Islamabad on Friday. And that could, in fact, be good news for the markets, because remember, this was one of the biggest slumps that the world was witnessing ever since COVID times, as we've just now broken out. The sharpest fall for crude, which was hovering over $117 per barrel, has now come down to roughly over $90 a barrel. It would be very interesting to watch how the markets respond. But the role that Pakistan is playing, this could very much be Pakistan's moment, given that there was much skepticism being attached to their to the Pakistanis because of their defense pact that they have with the Saudis. The Iranians were reluctant to view them as reliable negotiators. But so far, if the ceasefire does hold, it would be interesting to watch out for. The US president, of course, is currently buckling under pressure. There has been a lot of back and forth coming in from his side. But perhaps if one were to look at it in hindsight, in retrospect, it could very much be a pressure tactic that he was using when he was going out there and putting those angry posts on Truth Social. Nothing justifies the kind of profanities that the US president has resorted to. Not in the history of US presidents have we ever viewed or read something like that coming in from, say, a dignified person who is the head of state of one of the biggest global powers in the world. But that also, the threat that he could take all of Iran in a night's time has perhaps built pressure on Iran. Energy infrastructure on both sides, whether it is West Asia or whether it is Iran, was bearing the brunt of it. As we said, the oil refineries like Saudi Aramco, Ras Laffan in Qatar, Haifa in Israel, we've seen the impact it's had not just on the oil refineries and oil depots in Iran, but across West Asia. Economists and even the energy experts have gone on to indicate how this is going to take years and years now. But most importantly, the question is this ceasefire going to hold? The word we're picking in right now is how Israel also responds to this. And in this entire conversation, we should not forget Israel, which is why I would like to bring Akash, who's back with us. Akash, we've seen how in Gaza, ceasefires were announced, but they were not honored. And that is also one factor why the war continued for a very long time. The word we're picking in from Israelis right now is that we honor what the US president says, but what is going to be the challenge now to ensure that all parties are on the same page?
Right. So, cessation of activities. And in fact, I remember that how, during Operation Sindoor, Kanksha, I'm bringing Operation Sindoor here because during Operation Sindoor, it was appreciated that how, India and Pakistan were, of course, involved in these sort of activities. But then, in 4 days, of course, Pakistan begged for ceasefire and it was, in fact, achieved. In this particular scenario, we have seen Russia, Ukraine, we have, of course, seen Israel, Gaza, and we know that how after once you initiate the action, it is, quite too impossible to bring it to some sort of closure. In this particular case, if at all it is going to happen, is something that we'll wait and watch for. But Akanksha, you have got many of the details that are just trickling in. Over to you.
Right. Let me quickly bring in Peter Kuznick, in fact, who is an author and professor of history at the American University. Thank you so much, Professor Kuznick, for joining in. I want to first of all begin by asking you about how much of the ceasefire is going to hold. What, in your assessment, do you make of this ceasefire?
Well, I was glad to see that Israel agreed to the ceasefire because Israel had already begun taking out Iran's critical infrastructure today, bombing the bridges, bombing the railways. So Trump is in a very weak position here. The opposition to the United States role in this is exploding. Even the Republicans are very alarmed. Trump's very irrational behavior the last 2 days has scared people. His crazy tweet on Sunday about the opening the effing Strait of Hormuz, and they're calling them crazy bastards. And then today say he's going to wipe out, destroy, end Iranian civilization. He's talking about war crimes, and he's probably hinting about the use of nuclear weapons. So even Republicans were alarmed. I and others were calling for invoking the 25th Amendment to get him out of office, get him away from nuclear weapons. Others, and I also said that the military has got to refuse his illegal, immoral orders. But a lot of other people were saying the same thing. And so that was very weakening. The support for this war is minuscule already. But with the latest rants and raves from Trump, that even that little support seems to be evaporating. So this is a very welcome development. The Iranians say that Trump effectively, and we heard Trump's own words, effectively accepting Iran's 10-point proposal as a starting point. Well, that would be very positive. It would, one of the good consequences of this, Trump was on a rampage. He kidnapped the Maduros in Venezuela. He threatened Greenland. He threatened NATO. He threatened Canada and Panama. Fortunately for the world, Trump, I think, if he can learn any lesson, if he's educable, he learned that you can't control the world through the use of force, threatening, bullying, intimidating. And that's just not the way it works.
Let's also weigh in on all the aspects and various dimensions involved in this announcement, this big breakthrough that has taken place. One basic bone of contention to this entire war has been the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranian proposal, if I may quickly take you through it, to give you a bird's eye view of that, mentions that the Strait of Hormuz is going to be controlled by Iran and Oman, and they will be imposing a toll tax, because then they will be using that toll fee to sort of use for the damages and destruction that's been done to Iran during this war. Now, the word coming in from the US Congress is that by saying yes to this, it is a cataclysmic decision by the US president because he's technically signing up for Iran to have the control over the Strait of Hormuz. While you weigh in on how this has proven to be a huge strategic, economic, and political leverage for Iran, also shed light on what's here on the table.
Trump gave in to Iran's, to the reality. I mean, Trump didn't have any choice in this matter. He's accepting the reality, even though he previously said that he would never accept Iranian control over the strait. Well, now he's got it, and the Iranians say they will open it up, but on their terms, to countries who apply to Iran for passage. Iran has already opened it up to friendly countries. Now they're going to open it up to everybody, but it looks like they are going to charge hefty tolls that will help repair the damage that was been done to Iran.
Also, take a word to weigh in on the role that Pakistan has played, because the US president has also appreciated the role that the Pakistani Prime Minister has played. There's, in fact, a word coming in from Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, who's gone on to also announce that there could be possible negotiations happening on 10th of April, on Friday, in Islamabad. The last time we saw the ministerial happen, which was meant for 2 days, I can tell you, was wrapped up only in one. So yes, it's good to play host. It's good to be at the table because, as they say in diplomacy, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So, of course, Pakistan has its own stakes in playing host over here. But what is your expectation of any prospect of negotiations, which, of course, have to begin with trust building? Tehran has time and again highlighted how they feel betrayed because every time they've embarked on negotiations, they've been stabbed in the back.
Yeah, they've been blindsided twice now while they thought they were negotiating in good faith, and Israel and the United States bombed them. So they are not going to be very trusting right now. If the United States does this a third time, or Israel does it a third time, then nobody will ever even bother to negotiate with them again. Their credibility is already very low. Israel and the United States have become the two leading pariah nations in the world. And I think they realize that. Even their Gulf allies are very divided. Some of the Gulf states want them to continue fighting and destroying the government in Iran, but other Gulf states, realizing that they were going to be targeted by Iran, knew that this was too dangerous. And so the United States and Israel do not have a strong hand to play. And from a moral standpoint, they've got no credibility. So, or from a legal standpoint. So I think they're accepting a reality, and it's a reality that means that they're walking away without having achieved really any of their major goals. They have weakened Iran. They've destroyed a lot of Iran. But in terms of the nuclear program, in terms of the Strait, in terms of the missile program, in terms of regime change, none of that has been achieved. So, if anything, Iran is in a stronger position politically, but a weaker position economically.
The word coming in from Iran is exactly what you're saying. They've declared it as their victory. And in fact, if there have been any gains over here, we do see Iran now getting that leverage over the Strait of Hormuz, whether it is indeed, say, economic leverage or, in fact, even, say, strategic leverage. All right, we have markets reacting sharply to the ceasefire. Crude oil has plunged 20% to $91.5 a barrel. It's fallen sharply from days high of over $115 per barrel. That's the big breaking input we've been bringing to our viewers about crude oil. Professor Akuznik, do you see better days ahead for the market, at least for the next fortnight? All right, we'll try and reconnect with our guests, but that's the big breaking input that we are bringing to you. Remember, we were informing you about how the markets have started responding positively. They have, in fact, this is the biggest price drop, the sharpest price drop that we've, in fact, witnessed since COVID times. 20%. In fact, drop in the price of Brent crude. You look at the way it had been hovering between $118 to $120 a barrel. It's in fact come down all the way to over $90 a barrel. This is the big breaking input we are bringing to you right now. 91.5 is where it's come to. Now remember, till yesterday, with the US-Israeli strikes on Kharg Island, there was a lot of fear, and not fear just within Iranians or in West Asia, fear around the globe, because perhaps Kharg Island and the second set of strikes that took place yesterday on Kharg Island were also an indication of how the US could, in fact, go ahead and respond with fury and maybe eliminate some critical infrastructure, including their energy infrastructure, their military installations as well. But much of that has been averted, and this is indeed a big breakthrough coming in. The Iranian side, of course, has proposed 9 conditions. Whether or not the US is willing to meet all of those 9 conditions, we'll have to see. But the other big aspect is that Islamabad is now willing to play as a negotiator. In Islamabad is when you can expect the peace negotiation talks to take place. CNN also indicating that it could be presided over by the US president, which seems fairly nascent rather for the US president to do. So he could perhaps leave the initial round to his Middle Eastern envoy, Steve Witkoff, and his son, Jared Kushner. Word also coming in is that the US Vice President, J.D. Vance, who is in fact in Hungary currently, could also make a pit stop in Islamabad for the big round of negotiations or talks that do take place. Islamabad will be doing this for a second time. The first time around, remember, they had a meet, and we'll all have to see in what direction this is eventually going to be headed. I can see that Siddhant Mishra is joining me live from the newsroom at the moment. Siddhant, bring us up to speed with regards to all that's happened. The fact of the matter remains that, yes, the ceasefire has been announced. It is a big, huge breakthrough. Indeed, a gateway to peace, but not the destination itself. What are going to be the key takeaways of today's development?
Well, that's right, Akanksha. Good morning to you. Good morning to our viewers. We are bringing this live broadcast from CNN News 18 headquarters in Noida. And in fact, the big story is that ceasefire has been announced. Temporary ceasefire has been announced by President Trump. In fact, President Trump writes on Truth Social that based on his conversation with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir of Pakistan, and after they requested President Trump that President Trump hold off the destructive force being sent tonight to Iran, and subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. So for a period of 2 weeks, the strikes on Iran have again been postponed by the United States. In exchange, the Hormuz Strait will be open for the passing of vessels. So this is a big story which we are putting out for our viewers this morning after a month of intense battle, conflict between United States, Iran. Now the ceasefire is being announced, temporary ceasefire is being announced, and perhaps this is what President Trump is confirming on Truth Social. In fact, the Iranians are also confirming. Iranians are saying that 10-point peace plan, which they proposed, which is the Iranian peace plan, has been accepted by the United States, and perhaps this is the reason that they have agreed to open the Hormuz Strait as a goodwill gesture for next 2 weeks. Now, Pakistan has emerged as the mediator between United States and Iran. Perhaps we really don't know what role they actually played, Akanksha. What we could understand is that they were passing messages from United States to Iran. And in fact, United States was directly also speaking with the Iranian leadership, Foreign Minister Araghchi and various other leaders in the Iranian regime. So a big breakthrough. Perhaps from last 1 week, we have been reporting that how the mediation efforts are being made. There were several other countries also roped in by the United States to pass message to the Iran. And now we're getting to know that finally there is a temporary ceasefire announced by the United States, and Strait of Hormuz will be open for next 2 weeks.
So the big challenge right now is how to get all the parties at the talking table. Of course, and the word we've been picking up, Siddhant, from the Israelis is that they had several more targets to meet. They are not done with the war yet, but they will honor the word coming from the US president. You and I have also tracked the war in Gaza. So here to have all parties on the same plane is the big critical challenge. So now with the Pakistani Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif announcing that there could be talks taking place on Friday the 10th in Islamabad, what do you think are going to be the key challenges over here? There's already condemnation coming from the US Congress, where the US president is being criticized for saying yes to the Iranian proposal, which very much includes saying yes to Iran having control over the Strait of Hormuz, with Iran also imposing that toll fee, with Iran also splitting that toll fee with Oman. All of that has been mentioned in the Iranian proposal.
Well, that's right. So, Akanksha, there are many 10-point Iranian peace plan doing the rounds on social media. In fact, I have 2 such plans which are doing the rounds and are being said that these are the 2 10 points peace plan proposed by Iran. So this plan, Akanksha, says that a guarantee that Iran will not be attacked again, a permanent end to the war, not just a ceasefire, an end to Israeli strikes in Lebanon and against Iranian allies, the lifting of all US sanctions on Iran agreeing to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, introduction of $2 million fee per ship transiting Hormuz, revenue from shipping fees to be shared with Oman, funds to be used for reconstruction, establishment of safe passage, a broader framework to end regional hostilities. So
okay, I'm so sorry to interrupt you there. Let's quickly go across to Steve Gill, who is in fact a Republican leader, joining us live on the broadcast. Many thanks to you, Steve, for joining in. The word is, of course, big breakthrough right now. This is indeed a temporary truce, not peace itself. But Steve, I want you to weigh in on what the US is signing up for by giving a nod to the ceasefire proposal that's been sent out there by Iran. Steve.
First of all, I think you were correct when you said this is a pathway towards peace. But man, there are still a lot of potholes in that road. The devil is always in the details when you start getting into these negotiations. And I think what the Iranians are saying the U.S. has agreed to is not what Trump is saying he's agreed to. He is saying we will stop the imminent bombardment of the bridges and power stations and everything else while this ceasefire allows the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. But that has not been an agreement of the 10-point plan that Iran has put forward. In fact, President Trump has said, this is a framework we can start to discuss. So let's not mistake that just because the Iranians are saying that Trump has agreed to all these 10 points, we are far from that. And I think most of those points are still not even on the table in terms of the Trump administration. It's also interesting that those in the U.S. Congress who were screaming and in panic that this was going to be genocide and that it was war crimes are now screaming that Donald Trump is a chicken for chickening out and not killing tens of thousands of Iranians and destroying their infrastructure. So again, within the U.S. confines, the Democrats are once again in their Trump derangement syndrome of whatever he does, even if stopping the massive destruction that was planned, now they're against that and apparently wanted him to, continue to bomb and destroy. I'm not sure if also this agreement means that the military targets will not still be struck by either Israel or the U.S. This may only be we will not hit the enter that was planned to be hit at 8 p.m. Eastern time tonight. And more importantly, you still have the rogue IRSG and other operatives within Iran. As soon as this was announced, you had more missile strikes targeted at Israel. So is there a component in Iran that can reach an agreement? And if they do, can they implement it and make sure that their side fulfills it, including some of these rogue leaders who are still firing missiles, perhaps into the Strait of Hormuz, in addition to at Israel?
Steve, you're looking at a war which has reached 40 days. Both sides, if they were to get in a war assessment of the damages done, what has been achieved by each party, then I want you to take me through what has the United States achieved. Because Iran at the moment has declared this as a victory day. They, of course, are continuing to maintain control over Strait of Hormuz, rather looking to use it as not just a strategic leverage, they already are doing that, but also as an economic leverage. They've realized and woken up to the fact what they are sitting over is a geographical advantage, and they are not going to let go of it. So many are saying that the winner emerging out of this entire 40-day war is Iran more than the United States or Israel. In fact, West Asia has borne the brunt of this endless war.
Well, I think 40 days is not an endless war. And more importantly, if you count Iran as a victor after their Navy has been completely obliterated, their Air Force has been virtually obliterated, their major industries like aluminum plants and others have been obliterated. I don't think that's a win, and particularly when you add the 500-600 top leaders in their country all being dead. So if that's a win, I'm not sure they can afford to keep winning. I think it's important to note that President Trump made very clear 3 objectives going into the military portion of this conflict.
I think one also has. Okay, we also can't
dramatically reduce aspect of.
I seem to be losing your connection, Steve. Let me quickly bring in Glenn Carl, former CIA officer, also joining us on the broadcast. Many thanks to you, Glenn Carl, for joining in. Let me begin by having your thoughts on this temporary truce. Iran has already declared it as their big victory day.
Well, the gentleman who was just speaking before me was starting to list what he was going to say are 3 objectives which apparently the United States has achieved. Frankly, we went into the war without any particularly clear objectives. At first, it seemed that regime change was the objective. Then, and in addition, it was to eliminate Iran's nuclear weapons capability. Never will they have it. We must get the fuel. They can't have any program. They can't have any sites. Neither of those things has been achieved. The population hasn't risen up. And the fact that Iran's navy has been eliminated is really irrelevant, because what counts from a strategic perspective is the existence of the regime, which is not one that anyone should really support, and the potential for nuclear program, which has been damaged and set back. But so long as there is a will, Ali Bhutto reminded us all that a country can eat grass until it develops a nuclear capability, if it so desires. So strategically, the United States has accomplished an extension of a period of conventional safety for Israel, and that's largely about it. So this is not any way a victory for the United States.
All right. I'm going to bring in Steve on that note as well. But Siddhant, I can see our correspondent is also joining us live from the newsroom with all the latest updates that are coming in. What's the word that you're picking in, Siddhant, coming in from the US administration? We are already seeing a reaction that's coming from Marco Rubio. If you could give us a sense of what's happening right now.
So, Akanksha, in fact, the other day when President Trump briefed media at the White House, perhaps praising the U.S. armed forces for rescuing two of its pilots from Iran, from the enemy territory. In fact, at that point in time, also President Trump made United States position very clear. In fact, he spoke about several models on how to pursue things in Iran. He said that it could be Venezuelan model. Look at Venezuela. We captured Maduro. Now the second in command is the president of Venezuela, and she's cooperating with the United States. Perhaps he discussed many models in front of journalists, and he said that regime change was never the objective. And in fact, time and again, President Trump has called the new leadership in Iran less radical, more pragmatic, so on and so forth. So these were the hints, perhaps, these were the hints that United States is speaking with Iran, Akanksha, and in fact, there is a possibility of some kind of a ceasefire being announced. Despite that, there was pressure being put by President Trump on Iran by perhaps the post he made yesterday that everybody will die. Then there were strikes conducted by U.S. forces, B-1 bridge blown up, and so on and so forth. So pressure was also being built on Iran by sending more force to GCC. So all kinds of tactics were being used by the United States to get the ceasefire. Now this morning we have this news coming from President Trump that ceasefire has been announced for next 2 weeks. There's going to be the safe passage from the Hormuz Strait as well.
Right. And I want to quickly bring in Steve on that big note right now. Steve, there's going to be a lot of chatter about how the US president is buckling under pressure, given that by his own standards, the language that he's been using in the days gone by has been pretty much unhinged. And that also is a reflection of the kind of pressure he has been buckling under. Do you think that there's the lowest approval ratings that he's currently looking at is also going to mount more pressure on the US president, A, to justify the war goals, B, to be able to bring this war to an end? Because remember, for the longest time, this president has also touted himself as the Messiah of peace.
Well, first of all, with respect to my intelligence colleague, I disagree that the regime change was the top priority. President Trump made it clear that was not the top priority going in, but that it would likely result if you achieved the other three primary objectives. And again, when you've taken out 500 of the top leaders, religious leaders, political leaders, military, intelligence leaders, you've had effective regime change because the same people are not there, and you are seeing some people trying to approach things reasonably to find a solution rather than just the boastful bomb blast that we've been getting from the Iranian leadership. President Trump said there were three things he wanted to accomplish on the front end.
I'm sure you will agree that he's used regime change in all of his presidential addresses that he's made to the press, or talking about how the older guys have been eliminated, the new regime is more moderate. So it's not like regime change was never a goal. He has categorically maintained, and that is something I beg to differ, that if you say that regime change was never one of the goals, it was certainly one of the objectives.
Well, again, he has acknowledged that regime change would result when you eradicated their top leadership. The three goals were clear: to diminish or degrade almost substantially their ability to develop nuclear weapons. That has been achieved. And though my intelligence colleague claims that they still have uranium, yeah, it's buried under, mountains of rubble. And if they try to go back and get it to develop a weapons program again, the bombing will begin again.
Since you've talked about regime change, let's pursue this objective. Let's talk about it. Glenka, tell me, if you go by the mosaic doctrine that Iran follows, that Hydra concept that's often spoken about, which is what we are seeing play out at the moment in this war, that one commander is eliminated, there is another that is brought into the position. They have managed 40 days of a war with Mujtaba Khomeini, the new successor, incapacitated. So has the regime change brought any difference in the overall retaliation strategy of Iran? Glenka.
Well, that remains to be seen, but the nonsense we were just listening to is the stuff that we have to hear all day coming from the Republican Party. And this is not a partisan statement. I mean, that's simply insulting to one's intelligence to change the definition of regime when the regime doesn't change the way one hopes from the beginning is not regime change. Killing 500 people doesn't change the regime. It kills a lot of people. Has the regime been hurt? Is it weaker? Are there signs of command and control, disaggregation? Yes, all of those things are true. Iran's in a much worse position materially and militarily than it was 5 weeks ago. There's no question of that.
But you were just
Israel
claiming a
and the
moment ago
region,
that they've
in
won.
some ways, will be safer.
You were just claiming
Please
a
don't
moment
interrupt
ago
me.
that they have
Israel
won.
will-
So now
Steve,
you're
I will
acknowledging
give
that
you-
they're
I will
hurt.
give you time for a rebuttal.
I'll just
Steve,
wait
I
until
will
you
give
shut
you
up.
time for a rebuttal. Yes, let Glenn make his point and I'll give you time for a rebuttal. Yes, Steve.
I'm
Glenn.
sorry. I can't believe you have an
When
intelligence
Glenn,
when they
Glenn,
talk like
attached
the
to your name
truth,
when
they
you're
start
showing
to
so
talk
little
over you.
intelligence.
So stop smiling, be quiet,
Steve,
please.
Steve,
Now,
let
so
him
what
make
has
his point.
happened?
You should not be an intelligence officer, and I understand why you're a
No,
former
No,
one.
let's
this
not
is
get
what
further.
happens.
No
We get into
intelligence.
this nonsense.
Okay, Steve, I will
It's
give you
not
time for a
nonsense to
rebuttal.
point out you've
Please,
just preached
please
He should just
respect
cut
the
his
time.
microphone off
Please
because this is
respect
what
the
happens
time
when they talk.
and views of the other panelists over here. They are entitled to their own viewpoint. Glenn Carl, please finish
but
your
not
point.
their own
And then
facts.
yes, and Steve, I
Yeah,
will give you
I
time for a
think
rebuttal.
Yeah,
Glenn
I
Carl.
welcome the gentleman to say whatever he wants. He can say up, down, in, out, left, or right. That's all fine. But talking over someone when you've been shown to be a fool is not fine. So the regime is much weaker. That is certainly true. But the fact is that the goalposts, as one says in America, have changed from the beginning because we didn't achieve what we hadn't defined we were seeking to achieve from the first place. There was no clear objective other than they will have no nuclear weapons and there will be a changed regime. Neither of those things has occurred. Now, Iran won't be able to project its power except by stopping traffic in the Gulf for quite some time. That is progress of a sort. Yes, no question. But the Strait of Hormuz is a strategic strength and a weakness that has been shown in this recent campaign by the United States.
Okay, so I have a piece of big breaking news coming in, and let me quickly go across to this breaking input to, in fact, announce that Iran and Oman will be charging this fee on ships transiting through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow mouth of the Persian Gulf. And this indeed is going to happen during the 2-week truce. The official who had been directly involved in the negotiation spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. But this is what we are picking up. Siddhant, over to you. Share the details with us.
Well, that's right. So now we're getting to know that in next 2 weeks, both Iran and Oman will be charging money for the ships to be transiting through the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, if you go by what Foreign Minister Araghchi said, Akanksha, a short while back in a post on social media, that Iran will be opening the Hormuz Strait for the next 2 weeks in coordination with the Iranian armed forces. So that was the clause which was added by the Iranians. In fact, now, it is being said that the Hormuz is open for the safe passage, so on and so forth. But now, the reports are emerging regarding Oman and Iran both charging fees from the ships transiting through the Hormuz Strait. Perhaps we are still awaiting, Akanksha, more details on this particular story. But as I said, that details are very sketchy at this point in time. All we know is that there's going to be ceasefire for another 2 weeks. US says that Iran has agreed to discuss US's 15 points peace plan. Iran says that US has accepted Iran's 10-point peace plan, which includes the control on the Hormuz Strait. So let's see. As I said, that the details are very sketchy, and since Pakistan is involved, it is very difficult to trust what the stories that are doing the rounds.
Sure. Let me take that point forward with Steve as well. So, Steve, as we all know, both sides have their own versions to maintain at the moment, and understandably so. Even if US is not willing to completely give in to Iran's demand of exercising control over the Strait of Hormuz, it certainly is doing that so far. And in news that is coming in, they will continue to levy tax, the toll fee on all vessels passing through the strait, at least the enemy vessels for sure. So one has to really contemplate on how Iran also is going to be given that reparation for the damages, because remember, they're saying that they will be using this toll fee to sort of address the issue of the damage, the destruction that's taken place in Iran. And the US president has also placed the buck onto the West Asian allies that it will be they who will be bearing the bills for it.
President Trump agreeing to these 10 points that the Iranians are claiming is the deal. In fact, President Trump's initial comments have been that we're still pursuing our 15-point plan. They've got their offer. All we're doing right now is not bombing the living daylights out of them at 8 p.m. Eastern time. And the Iranians are running with that, declaring victory, which is far from the truth. And I think we will not see these $2 million per ship payments going to Iran and Oman. I think UAE, I think Saudi Arabia, and I think certainly the U.S. are not going to go along with that piece. So I think we're a long way from the deal the Iranians are claiming is in place.
So, Steve, tell me, are you content with the way this war has happened for the last 40 days? It was a war which started also on the promise of ensuring American security. Where is that guarantee that today there couldn't be a missile directed towards America, as was claimed by the US president, something Iran has firmly denied?
Well, again, the 3-point plan that President Trump had was to degrade their nuclear weapons development. Although they kept saying they were just developing nuclear power, you don't do that under a 300-meter mountain. Second, it was to limit or eradicate their ballistic missile systems that they claimed could only go 2,000 kilometers and yet could go 4,000. So you can't trust what the Iranians are saying. Their ability to reach London and Paris and Berlin and their neighbors with those missiles has been dramatically degraded, as we've looked in the day-to-day missiles where they were firing 350 a day the first few days, and that's been down limited to whatever rogue commanders they have that have a few more missiles and launchers to fire. And then the third thing was to degrade their economic capability to fund Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. That has clearly been done. And again, if President Trump had wanted to absolutely destroy their oil revenues, he would have attacked their oil facilities directly rather than the power plants and the other things. He wanted to let those revenue generators continue so that Iran could rebuild. But I don't think there's any chance that President Trump is going to agree to allow them to charge some sort of a mob.
I need to quickly cut over to the studio as well. So I want to quickly bring in Glenn on that note as well. Glenn, how far has the US managed its goal of dismantling Iran's nuclear ballistic programs, or even say the nuclear facilities?
Well, it does seem that there's been, it's pretty clear there's been dramatic damage done to Iran's conventional capabilities. Let's talk about that for a moment. Iran had, or a government has several ways to project its power militarily. It has its air force, its navy, conventional forces, and then in Iran's case, it has quite aggressive and extensive surrogates. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, groups in Iraq and in Syria. All of those things have been seriously harmed or damaged, weakened now. That's a very good thing. In particular, the one way they really could strike conventionally was with the missile capability. And that has not been eliminated, but it certainly has been diminished substantially. The surrogates, too, and this is largely through Israel's actions in Lebanon with respect to Hezbollah in particular, have been grievously weakened. So from a conventional point of view, the one way they could strike out, which was the missiles, has been diminished. That's a good thing for everybody, no question about that. The nuclear capabilities have been set back. There's no question about that either. These are good steps. The potential, however, strategically remains for them to pursue what they wish to pursue. Killing the chief of operations, the CIA and the U.S. military became very efficient in killing the chiefs of operations for various insurgent groups in Iraq. The life expectancy of an insurgent during the Iraq War was 1 week. We were very impressive that way. However, killing the chief of operations over and over and over did not solve the strategic structural problem. There was a different issue, frankly. And so in Iran, the problem long term remains the same because a hideous regime remains still in power, weakened but in power.
Steve, I want you to give me a sense of how the Americans have been responding to this overall crisis in West Asia, because the pinch on the pockets, or the way the pockets are bleeding rather, is felt across the globe, not just here from India where I am, but also in the United States. The cost of living crisis is taking a toll on most Americans, and perhaps that's also reflecting in the overall approval ratings of the US president, which, let's not forget, are hitting an all-time low. Steve?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that my colleague and I are in agreement with most of everything he just said. Second, again, the oil prices have dropped about $15, $16 a barrel just since this ceasefire was announced. Whether that will hold or not remains to be seen. And I was talking with a couple of our U.S. senators earlier today. There will be a lag time, because simply getting oil doesn't mean you can refine it, you can produce it as to gasoline or diesel fuel. So the gas prices won't come down immediately. And gas has a bigger political impact here, and I suspect in other parts of the world as well, because everywhere you drive around town, there are big signs telling you exactly what a gallon or a liter of gas costs today. People know to the penny. We may not know what a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk costs, but by gosh, we know exactly what gasoline costs. So it has a higher political impact. And when you look at the other economic indicators in the U.S., other than gasoline, jobs are up, inflation is down, the economy is, despite this conflict of the last 40 days, continuing to boom better than people expected and better than their predictions. So I suspect that if this concludes and the oil flow begins to be back in earnest like it was before the conflict, gas prices in the U.S. will come down, and the economic boom in the U.S. will resume.
But I'm sure gas prices, depending on war, is a factor that you are also agreeing upon, and I'm glad you say that. So all the more reasons for the US to ensure that this war comes to an end as soon as possible. But I'm going to ask you and Glenn to please hold on to those thoughts, because we also have to quickly cut across to the studio. My colleague Siddharth Pishra has some inputs for us. Yes, Siddharth?
That's right. So, Akanksha, narrative is very important in times of war and even in times of ceasefire. And perhaps who understands this better than President Trump? So now CNN World has done this story on Iran's 10-point peace plan, Akanksha. Perhaps this story says that it has also agreed to accept Iran's nuclear enrichment and recognize its continued control over the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, this is the article published in CNN World. If I could request my camera person to perhaps zoom in and show this article. So this article by CNN World, Akanksha, mentions that United States accepts Iran's nuclear enrichment and recognize its continued control over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, President Trump has not liked this article by CNN World, and this is the reason that he perhaps has come up with a post on Truth Social, and he says that the alleged statement put out by CNN World News is a fraud, and as CNN well knows, the false statement was linked to a fake news site from Nigeria, and of course immediately picked up by CNN and blared out as a legitimate headline. The official statement by Iran was just released and posted on Truth. He referred to him posting Abbas Araghchi's statement, Akanksha. Authorities are looking to determine whether or not a crime was committed on the issuance of the fake CNN World statement, or was it a sick rogue player. CNN is being ordered to immediately withdraw this statement with full apologies for their, as usual, terrible reporting. So this is the fresh post from President Trump, Akanksha. In fact, he blames CNN World for reporting that the Iran will be controlling the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran will continue with the nuclear enrichment program.
Stay with us, Siddhant. Let me quickly also bring in Glenn Carl and, of course, even Steve, who continue to stay with us. Gentlemen, Glenn Carl, we've seen there's also a parallel war of misinformation that has been doing the rounds. There's, in fact, been no authentic source, and more to say, when we talk about Iran particularly, they've been very closed with regards to the kind of information sharing we've seen come out from their end. There's also been AI videos which have in fact been released from their end as well. What was your sense of the kind of parallel wars we see in terms of, say, one on the battleground and the other in terms of propaganda?
Disinformation and propaganda are major parts of warfare, of course, whether the missiles and the guns are firing and launching or not. This is ongoing at all times. And Iran has one of the more capable cyber intelligence capabilities in the world, and is quite aggressive. So one should always take with an entire bowl of salt, not just a grain of salt, anything one hears, frankly, from any source, yours included, with all respect to it. You always have to try to verify from multiple sources anything that one hears in an international context, in particular, something coming from Iran. And in a time of negotiation near the end of a conflict, you want to be wary of what either party says, my own country included, because of course you're negotiating here in public, and you aren't going to put out your bottom line, hard line positions at the beginning, and you'll always try to get the most that you can. No negotiation ever ends, and you always will try to manipulate the others and the public to support your position or to mislead your opponents. So I don't place too much stock in what comes out of Tehran right now, or for that matter, the United States. We'll see what happens as things go along. What is most likely is that there will be a ceasefire and that the Straits of Hormuz will slowly open. And it is hard. Here's one point I will agree with my American colleague. It is hard to imagine that after 5 weeks of what we've gone through, any party, the United States first among them, will all of a sudden allow Iran to set itself up as toll taker at the Straits of Hormuz.
It's interesting that you, in fact, highlight the Strait of Hormuz. I want to quickly bring in Steve on that part as well with regards to how many parties are we looking at when we do talk about peace? Steve, in the days gone by, we've seen international parties getting involved, as the word coming in from the Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif himself is that Islamabad could be playing host. There's word coming in that China also perhaps did weigh in at the last moment. You also have Egypt, Turkey, Oman. What will ensure that all parties are aligned together, especially Israel? We've seen in Gaza that even after US intervention, the Israelis have not stopped. What are the challenges ahead for the US president at the moment, in your viewpoint, Steve?
Well, it's not just what the Israelis are doing. As soon as this ceasefire was announced, rockets were fired from Iran into Israel. So again, you still have these rogue players that are not under the command and control of the Iranian leadership. And I think that still presents a problem. And while Glenn and I may disagree on many things, I can't disagree with anything he just said. You know, the idea that President Trump is going to agree to sort of a mob protection racket of oil flowing through the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, he's a New Yorker. He knows how the protection racket works in downtown New York City. He's not going to agree to that with Iran. And the idea that Iran is announcing that they're going to be able to continue with their nuclear weapons development, that is an absolute non-starter with this administration. So what the Iranians are saying is far from what the deal will be. All that's been done now is a cessation in the bombing that was supposed to start tonight, and then the difficult work of taking the two frameworks and finding something that meets in the middle. But I can assure you, the Trump administration is not going to agree to let Iran make money off the ships shipping through Hormuz or develop nuclear weapons. Those are definite non-starters. And the fact that Iran is claiming a victory on those counts is not true.
Please stay with me. We'll have to quickly cut across to CNN right now because they are, in fact, reporting from Tel Aviv. Let's listen into what's happening over there in Tel Aviv right now.
As Chief National Security Analyst Jim Sciutto in Tel Aviv. What are you hearing from Israeli officials on the status of this proposed two-week ceasefire?
Well, Anderson, we have a ceasefire announcement. We don't yet have a ceasefire because since the announcement, we've seen, as you said, 3 waves of Iranian missile attacks here. Just a few minutes ago, looking up at the skies over Tel Aviv, I saw one of the interceptions here in the central part of the city. So Iran is still firing missiles at Israel and, as you note, at its Gulf neighbors as well. Whether those are the last salvos before the guns fall silent or a sign that there are still details to be worked out, we don't know. But we do know that when we look at the initial demands and goals of this war, that there's a great deal of distance between that 10-point proposal that the president says will be the basis of negotiations and what America's goals were going in here, because the 10 points includes things like complete sanctions relief for Iran, but also Iran continuing to exercise ultimate control over the Strait of Hormuz, which is something that would be an enormous concession for the president to make. Israeli officials have been telling us consistently since the start of this war that they would not consider a victory without 2 things. 1, regime change, and no one in this country believes, despite the president's claims, that there is regime change. They see quite the same leadership in place in Iran. But also, Israel has long demanded and still wants effective restrictions, really an ending of Iran's nuclear program, including controlling those hundreds of kilograms of highly enriched uranium. That hasn't happened either. And while the president will say that he has met all of America's goals, frankly, the president's list of goals has changed throughout as well. At one point included regime change. That hasn't happened, as well as control of the nuclear program. So you have big gaps between the U.S. and its main ally, Israel, but also gaps between what the president said he wanted to achieve and what's been achieved to date.
Jim Sciutto, thanks from Tel Aviv. Joining me now is CNN senior White House correspondent Kristen Holmes. So is the White House offering many specifics at this hour, either about the ceasefire?
Well, that's right. So let's take you through the peace plan. Perhaps what does this truce actually means? Now, threat to pause, high stakes, brinksmanship as a diplomatic tool by Trump. United States says that Iran agrees for discussion over 15-point peace proposal by the United States. Iran says that United States accepts discussion over Iran's 10-point peace plan. Now, Hormuz deal, Strait reopening will determine whether ceasefire holds or not. Now, uncertainty over Strait of Hormuz also continues because Iran says that Strait of Hormuz will be open for another 2 weeks, but in coordination with the Iranian forces. Tactical pause, 2-week window of pressure wall for negotiations. Now, in fact, many are saying, many strategic experts are saying that it's a tactical pause. 2-week window is a pressure, perhaps for a ceasefire. Now, the big question is, U.S. pauses strikes uncertainty about Iran complying. There are, many ways to look at this ceasefire being announced by President Trump. Perhaps many are saying that this could be a tactic to buy more time, perhaps ahead of the bigger strike. In fact, it looks like that both United States and Iran are still not on the same page. Now, Israel is wary. Pressure on Netanyahu could shape if it backs pause. Now, it also depends on Israel that whether they are going to abide by this unilateral announcement of ceasefire by President Trump. Is it a Pak's moment? Positions itself as bridge to de-escalation. Now, Pakistan has been involved in passing messages between United States and Iran. In fact, they also had meeting of the foreign ministers in Islamabad. And in fact, they say that we are mediating. So let's see whether they actually have role to play or they were simply passing messages. Now it's time to go back to CNN International. In fact, we have been told that Fareed Zakaria is live on CNN World.
Sense that it's a lot better than what Donald Trump was threatening to,
wiping out civilization.
wipe out, Iranian civilization, or any of those kind of broad-based expansions of and escalations. But the negotiations here have been a kind of almost a casebook in how not to negotiate. So it's not surprising that the ceasefire is fragile. You have no actual negotiation going on between the two parties. You have no real trust built up between them. The last two negotiations, the United States was in with Iran. It essentially started bombing Iran in the middle of those negotiations. So it's not surprising that even though there does seem to be some kind of an agreement, it's very fragile and it's probably going to take a while to work out.
The president indicating tonight that this is kind of well along on things that possibly could be agreed on. It seems like the 10-point plan that Iran has talked about implies Iran control over the Strait of Hormuz, not just in this 2-week period, but afterward. This conflict has shifted from concern of Iran's nuclear program to let's get the Strait of Hormuz open, and you don't hear a lot about Iran's nuclear program now.
So you've hit the nail on the head. This is the single biggest strategic shift that's taken place and strategic loss for the United States and its allies. What this war has done is handed Iran a weapon that is far more usable than nuclear weapons, which is the Strait of Hormuz, choking off global oil supplies, essentially disrupting the global economy. And what they have realized is they have this weapon, they can use it, they can turn it on and off without will, and anything that institutionalizes it means that at this point, the United States and its Gulf allies are in a sense hostage to Iranian good graces in order to get their product out.
So could there be a deal in which Iran remains in control of the Strait of Hormuz?
It seems like Iran will be very reluctant to give up that power and that authority. And just to give you a sense of what a big loss this is, Anderson, the United States' first military actions in 1799 were about freedom of navigation, the so-called quasi-war with France, then the war with the Barbary pirates. That was all about freedom of navigation. Since then, the United States has fought for and tried to maintain the principle of freedom of navigation. As the global superpower, that has been absolute, we had in 1979, the legislation passed, the freedom of navigation program. That is what is being given up here. The idea that Iran can control one of the key choke points of the world economy flies in the face of the whole basic responsibility the U.S. had. And as you say, this was not an issue. For 47 years of tension with the U.S. and Iran, Iran never closed the Strait of Hormuz. So the United States and Israel have somehow handed Iran a weapon at the end of this that they never had. And as you said, the nuclear program is not even in the 10 points.
So if Iran remains building a nuclear program or the capabilities to have a nuclear device and then gets control of the Strait of Hormuz, they would end up in a better situation than they were before this.
Right. So they have then the nuclear stockpile which they have. They have this maritime position of power. But remember, they're also proposing Iran's parliament has passed legislation to this effect to charge $2 million per ship. So the number of ships that normally cross the Strait of Hormuz is about 100. You do the math, and JP Morgan has done the math, that is $90 billion of additional revenue for Iran, on top of about 50 to 60 billion in oil revenues.
That's a lot of ballistic missiles.
All of a sudden, Iran is, after Saudi Arabia, the richest country in the Middle East. Oh. And so you've taken an Iran that was weak, contained, its nuclear program shattered, and you've given it control of the strait, enormous new revenue flows, and the nuclear stockpile. Yeah. It's a very strange outcome.
So much for the art of the deal. Fareed Zakaria, thanks very much. Coming up next, the domestic political dimension as our CNN Global War coverage continues.
All right, we're getting in some very interesting breaking inputs. This is with regards to the post that the Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif sent out on X announcing Pakistan's role in this overall ceasefire. And in fact, his draft clearly seems that it's been scripted, because on that post on X, which begins by saying draft Pakistan Prime Minister's message on X, and that's what follows the overall message that Shehbaz Sharif, of course, has gone on to send by saying that diplomatic efforts for peaceful settlement of the ongoing war in the Middle East are progressing steadily, strongly and powerfully, with the potential to lead to substantive results in near future. But most importantly, it's a gaffe, it's a blunder by Pakistan's Prime Minister, where his message clearly has been drafted for the Pakistani Prime Minister, because that post on X goes on to show that it's a draft. Who's scripting Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's messages? We do not know, but he's put it out there himself, and there couldn't be a bigger gaffe or blunder than that one. Let's quickly go across to Siddharth, who will perhaps show us that post on the wall. Siddharth, if you could open it out for our viewers.
Well, that's right, Akanksha. What mediation they will do, even they can't even write their own post. In fact, this is a post from Shehbaz Sharif's handle, diplomatic efforts for peaceful settlement of the ongoing war in the Middle East are progressing steadily, strongly and powerful, etc., etc. All those things he writes on X. Now, this message appears on X, which says draft Pakistan's PM's message on X. In fact, I have this this screenshot of the message before and after. If I can ask my video journalist to pan and show it to our viewers. Now, this was the draft message which he posted as it is, Akanksha, and it clearly one can see that it's written draft Pakistan's PM's message on X. Then immediately this message was deleted, and the new message was uploaded. The same message was uploaded without the first line, which was draft Pakistan's PM message on X. So, again, a huge embarrassment for Shehbaz Sharif and Pakistan, and perhaps, they call themselves mediator, and now they are, posting copy-pasted messages. Perhaps nobody knows who is writing messages, whether it's Asim Munir's office or whether it's White House sending messages to Shehbaz Sharif to post on X. We don't know. Back to you, Akanksha.
Okay. Let me quickly take this forward with Steve and Glenn as well. Even though it's a gaffe, nobody can, deny the fact that they are in a position to play negotiator right now, given that indications coming in from the Prime Minister is that they will be holding talks in Islamabad on Friday. Steve, if I could bring you in on that side, how reliable is Pakistan as a mediator at the moment, given that they are a country which continues to provide a safe haven to terrorists themselves? More importantly, the Iranians have been very skeptical of the role that they are playing because of their defense agreement with Saudi Arabia, which is something perhaps Glenn can weigh in on. But Steve, let me begin with you.
Moving story that we're talking about in real time. First of all, I think Fareed Zakaria was absolutely wrong when he said the 10-point deal does not include nuclear enrichment. I think your reporter, when he went through the list, it was definitely one of the top 10 items on the Iranians. As to this apparent glitch on what they put on X, there are those in the Trump White House that think the best thing we could do for Trump is to break both his thumbs so he can't text. Maybe the Pakistani Prime Minister needs the same treatment before they send out texts.
Okay, I'm running short of time. Quickly, Glenn, how reliable can Pakistan be viewed as a negotiator at the moment?
I wouldn't have any problem with Pakistan as an intermediary, as an American, or if I were Iranian. The fact that they do support terrorist groups and create problems in a number of other ways and have stability issues are all not really relevant to the fact that you have to have some channel through which to convey messages. The decisions really are being made in Tehran and in the White House, in particular in the White House. This is essentially a unilateral ceasefire, but Pakistan can do it, sure.
Okay, many thanks to you.
I think we're far from a deal, though.
All right, I need to cut into a quick break, but thank you for making this an interesting discussion. With that, we're slipping into a quick break. Stay tuned to CNN News 18 as we bring you all the latest updates from West Asia.
You don't have hostilities with Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE. You don't have hostilities with some of the other Muslim.
On the contrary, at this point, Iran is attacking these countries. At this point, we are actually enhancing our cooperation with these countries because we share the same threat.
So in this case, all right, so Iran wants to wipe out Israel. Israel faces an existential threat with Iran. Why am I suffering for it? As an Indian or someone who's not in...
We didn't attack Indian interest. Who attacked Indian interest? The Islamic regime of Iran attacked Indian interest. They are punishing you for no reason whatsoever.
No,
You
when I
should
say,
hold them accountable.
yeah, but from their point of view, Ambassador Reza, if tomorrow there was a concerted attack on Israel, Israel will war game and do everything to ensure that that attack doesn't happen. So today, from Iran's point of view,
But
Iran is
does it
doing,
give you-
Iran may be behaving rogue from your point of view, but Iran may come out and say, listen, I have to protect my interests. If I've got to work, if this is a deterrence, if blocking Hormuz becomes a deterrence, I will use it as a deterrence.
That's not legitimate because you cannot attack parties that are not involved, that have done nothing to you. So what this regime is doing is completely illegal, it's unacceptable, and actually the international community to a certain extent is speaking one voice because it condemned Iran at the UN Security Council once, and they are going to do another resolution this coming Friday. The question is what the world is going to do in face of just such a despicable conduct that is coming from this regime. Okay, because in order to advance their murderous agenda, they don't mind not only killing innocent people and attacking their enemies, they are also attacking their friends.
But Ambassador Reza, if that was the case, there should have been other nations which should have mobilized and pressured Iran to back off. That doesn't seem to have happened.
Great question. Why do you think it doesn't happen?
Yeah, I was about, don't ask me that guy, I'm going to ask you that question.
Okay.
Why do you think that's not happened?
Look, first of all, you have to ask them. Okay, so you'll have a chance, you maybe have other guests, you can ask them. I think that unfortunately, despite the fact that we've been able to garner diplomatic support in the last decades to put diplomatic pressure on Iran and even put some economic pressure on Iran, many countries weren't willing to go all the way because they have other considerations. Okay?
Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome viewers. It is indeed a good morning. We may say that for the rest of the world, as a 2-week truce seems to be on the cards. Now, in this war or in any war, there is never a victor, but there will always be those who will feel vanquished. There will be those who try and project that they have won, but at the end of the day, war costs everybody. And in this case, the people who are neutral, the nations that were not even involved in this war, have perhaps hurt as much as the nations that were in this conflict, in this war. Into its 40th day, just hours before the deadline, both sides announced that they are going to cease and desist for at least 2 weeks. Uneasy lies this ceasefire, viewers. But is there a positive impact on the world markets already? Is there an impact on certain factors? Most importantly, here on this very special broadcast, while we get you all the messages and the proposals, etc., from either side, what President Donald Trump is claiming, what the Iranian regime or the IRGC is claiming, what will be the proposal, or will all this be now thrashed out over the course of the next 15 days? The most important aspect, and we're just calling it on our screen, is this Strait of Hormuz. Is this Strait of Hormuz, and we have to understand whether or not we see traffic right through this passage. Right now, there is no traffic. Right now, the Strait of Hormuz has got ships on either side, here and here, all waiting to pass. More importantly, there is a huge concentration of ships on the Iranian side at near Bandar Abbas. There is a concentration around Ras Al Khaimah and in the Abu Dhabi, Dubai region. There is a concentration even here around Fujairah, and they all want to pass through the Persian Gulf. This is not going to heal in 2 weeks. But the moment traffic starts, there will be nations that will be heaving a sigh of relief, because a lot of them, especially in South Asia, are facing an energy crisis. Bharat will also face is facing a challenge with LPG and LNG. We've been so far able to mitigate and meet, but we are also coming to the end of our reserves, viewers, and this becomes critical. And what's happened? The biggest drop in oil prices perhaps ever in just 1 hour. Nearly 16 to 17% drop in the oil prices, and the oil prices drop below $100 a barrel. The moment both sides say we are willing to talk, we are willing to go and engage in a ceasefire or think about a ceasefire. So truce and not tomahawks this Wednesday, viewers, and that becomes critical. Another positive views that we'd like to share with you. This is the indication, the Gifty indication, we'll try and call it, already shows that the markets will open in the green by at least about 700 or 800 points, if not more. There will be a surge. I'm just going to, as the camera is coming in closer, look at this. This is the Gift Nifty, and this is the projection this morning that it's going to go up to 23,861, up by about 724 points. So there is a lot. There are a lot of positives that we can gain, because nobody wants war. But there are some fallouts. There are some aspects which perhaps many would say, hey, this has become too costly for those who came out to say we need to teach the Iranians a lesson, or this regime a lesson. Those that started with the objective of a regime change, have they been able to achieve that? Those that who started with free trade and increasing trade, have they been able to achieve that? Or does now Hormuz have no international waters anymore? It's totally under the control of the Iranians, who are willing to share the revenue with their neighbors across the Hormuz Strait, that is Oman. And is this going to be a permanent deal? There is confusion. What are the 10 points? Are there 12 or are there 15? But both sides are approaching this from their maximalist positions. Can the US and Israel ensure that there will be no more ballistic missiles? When the Iranian regime says we want a guarantee there will be no more wars, does that guarantee imply on them too that they will not enrich uranium or pursue nuclear weaponry? They will not pursue ballistic missiles or a horde of ballistic missiles that could threaten the entire region. Will these conditions apply to both sides? Because if you were to quote the Iranians themselves, the regime themselves, then in the past, viewers, whenever there has been ceasefire, it has been always followed by more war. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal with us, Errol Mocock, senior spokesperson, Republicans overseas, is with us, and Major General Sanjay Soy, defense expert, with us this morning. My namaste and thank you. Greetings, gentlemen. Thank you for making the time. Special circumstances, exigent circumstances. Everybody wants peace, but peace at what cost and for whom? These are all questions. Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, a big positive impact on the markets will be seen. A lot of people will be heaving a sigh of relief, but then uneasy lies this truce, because this can break. This is very fragile at the moment.
Yes, indeed. You're absolutely right. You know, things are fragile. And despite describing the plan as a significant step, President Trump also stated that it is currently not good enough. Now, several core demands in Iran's proposal are considered non-starters or highly unlikely for the US to accept without major concessions. For instance, the condition that the US should lift all sanctions. This is what Iran demands, but I don't think the US is likely to agree. Then again, you know, one of the conditions which Iran places is that relating to military withdrawal. For the plan calls for the withdrawal of all US combat forces from the region. Again, this is something I don't think that President Trump is going to agree to. Then also the issues relating to financial compensation, the Strait of Hormuz control, nuclear enrichment. All these are demands placed by Tehran, which will have to be negotiated. Let's see what comes out. But nonetheless, it's still heartening that talks are scheduled to begin on Friday, 10th April. And let's see what comes out of these talks. So I think there is the immediate sense of relief, but a longer term solution remains to be found. And as you said, one hopes that it doesn't lead to further wars.
Well, yes, we've just got pictures. This is Tehran. There are people who are coming out and waving the flags because there has been peace that's been called. There are traffic on the streets, cars jammed on the streets. There is celebration, but to a certain extent, many would want to look at it with a pinch of salt, that while there will be thousands and perhaps millions who would come out and say this war ends, this also signal perhaps a certain messaging that will go across to this current regime. There was a big uprising in January, viewers. Will those people now have the courage to come back on the streets with perhaps the confidence that they're not going to be shot point blank? So these are questions which will remain. What will happen over the course of the next 60 to 90 days if 60 to 90 days if this ceasefire holds, if there is a cessation of hostilities from both sides? Will there be a transition within Persia itself? The transition from the Republic of Iran to what was erstwhile Persia? These are all questions that remain. There are people who are standing here, they're standing with the flags, but do you see in the body language the kind of jubilation that was expected or celebration that was expected? So that's the reason why there is a little bit of hesitance in trying to say, are these celebrations forced, muted? There is no revelry. People are out on the streets. They are saying, thank God there is peace. But is this actually a victory celebration? That is something. Yes, there will be a group among the Persian public who will be supporting the regime, who will be happy about this, and who would claim that Iran has won and this regime has won. But the questions are, where is Mr. Mujtaba Khamenei? Why is he being AWOL all this while? Is there going to be a regime change or perhaps a different leader going forward? How much of information has Iran actually withheld? What are the losses that the regime has suffered, and at what cost will they be able to stand up again? Many questions, and we'll try and address all of that with our guests in a bit. But first, we've got news coming through. First on the celebrations, Akash, if you look at it, there are people there, but the flags are not being waved with the kind of zest or fervor that one would have expected. They seem to have all come out, or have they been exhorted to come out? These are all questions. There's a lot that can be read from pictures. And we've also got, Akash, are you there with us? All right, we'll go across to Akash in a bit. We've got more news coming through. The 2-week ceasefire plan, more news coming through. The 2-week ceasefire plan includes allowing both Iran and Oman to charge fees on ships transiting through the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow mouth of the Persian Gulf, and the official has said that Iran would use the money it raised for reconstruction. Now, it wasn't immediately clear what Oman would use its money for. The strait is the territorial waters of both Oman and Iran, and there's a narrow stretch, 3 kilometers on each side as in terms of spread, which is given as deemed as international waters for free passage. But this becomes a strait which will again be taxed. So costs will go up for many who are going to transact with nations inside the Persian Gulf. Now, the world has also considered the passage an international waterway and never paid tolls before. The official who had been directly involved in the negotiations spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. So Iran and Oman to charge fee in the Strait of Hormuz, Iran to use the funds for reconstruction. Oman purpose for fees is so far unclear, but they are willing to share it because they are either side of the Strait of Hormuz. The ceasefire agreement. Last 2 weeks, we've got Akash joining us now. Akash, the pictures that are coming in from Tehran, this is not jubilation. There are people outside, but they are not fervently waving the flag. So are there undercurrents that will perhaps come to the surface the moment bombs stop raining from the skies?
Right. So, Anand, you see, we know that this is a conditional ceasefire, and people in Iran also know it for a fact. We have seen straight from 28th of February, the first day, the beginning of this war, even then, people in Iran, in fact, leaders came out in public and said that this is a backstabbing, given that diplomatic channels and efforts were on even at that time. So they are not very confident in the sort of statements that have come from US President or the announcement for ceasefire. And that is possibly the reason why, even when they have come out on street, they still don't know as to if it is going to hold. Further, Anand, Strait of Hormuz has been, in fact, the discussion point, since the beginning of this war. We know that how both the sides wants to negotiate, in fact, want to negotiate on this particular point. But this has not been the precedent. If you are going to charge for a natural strait, you have got other points, other straits as well. For example, Malacca Strait, where maybe tomorrow Indonesia or Malaysia can come forward and can say that we also want to charge for this particular strait. So there are a lot of technicalities, that are still there, and that's the reason why we are waiting for these sort of negotiations that are going to happen on 10th of April. We have been given to understand in Islamabad. It will be interesting to see as to how things pan out from now onwards. But yes, for now, we have acknowledgement from both the sides, where US and in fact Iran have somewhere acknowledged that yes, they have somewhere reached to a point where they are somewhere accepting the terms for the meantime. They are going to cess, in fact, they are going for the ceasefire for now, and a cessation of activities is going to happen, is what we are anticipating with the kind of statements that have come from Foreign Minister of Iran or US President for that matter. But again, Iran, Anand, Iran has got several points, 8 points, where they want somewhere the damage, where they want to charge the fees, where they want a permanent solution for the kind of problem that they are facing. On the other hand, we have US, where they have categorically mentioned that we don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, we don't want them to enrich their uranium, and a number of terms. In fact, earlier also we have seen the 15-pointer plan, which was not accepted by Iran. On the other hand, the counter, plan given by Iran, where they want Israel to in fact pause all the sort of activities that they are taking against Hezbollah. So how things pan out from now onwards is very important. But yes, a big piece of breaking news, in fact, we have been discussing since morning, and this is for the benefit of our viewers, that how both the sides, both US and Iran, have somewhere acknowledged this ceasefire, and we are anticipating that now these activities would not continue at least for the next 2 days, Anand.
Right. We've got more news coming through. I just want to show this. Jeremy Diamond, CNN's Jerusalem correspondent, has said that despite this announcement, Israel and Iran, if I can ask our camera to just come across here and show this on my screen itself. He's come out and said, viewers, that despite this announcement, Israel and Iran are continuing to trade strikes. And we've seen at least 2 rounds of Iranian ballistic missile fire towards Israel since this tweet. An IDF spokesperson tells me Israel is still carrying out strikes in Iran. So this is the residue before the timeline kicks in. Ceasefire from what time? 2 weeks of ceasefire starting what time, viewers? That's not yet been said, and that's not yet been openly stated. Is that the reason why these strikes still continue? That the last hurrah before we see cessation happens, before the command actually streams down and comes down to the final posts or the operating posts or the tactical centers? These are questions that remain. We'll try and go across to our guest to try and understand how would you see this. Sanjay Soy is with us. We also have Errol Mocock with us, and also Prabhu Dayal. Sanjay Soy, tactically, does this actually, will you say that till the time the ceasefire message comes down to the tactical end at the ground level, these strikes will continue? There will be about a window of 60 to 90 minutes when these strikes will still happen?
Anand, thank you so much. In fact, very interesting. And you see, initially, the barrage of questions in initial 3-4 minutes you asked, that is in everybody's mind. What will happen? And now the question is the way Jeremy has brought out that attacks are still continuing. You rightly asked the execution at tactical level. You see, what is the stand of Israel? Though they have accepted it, but from in the heart of heart, and what I get to know, that some of their ranks and files are not really accepting, because they say, what have we gained after fighting for 4 weeks? If the regime in Iran remains same, and we have not been able to meet, and none of the objectives have been met, and now we are doing something basically just to open the Strait of Hormu. So that's a reaction. It is a reactive decision which has been taken. So though they have accepted for 2 days, but let's see how things fan out. But on the other hand also, is IRGC, has everyone accepted, because the way ballistic missiles have been fired on Israel. So that question is a big question at tactical level. But the fact is that positive is that some talks are on
So far, we were hearing of back channel talks and at different level, nothing officially. Iran was maintaining a stand that they are not willing to talk, but now they have officially come out that they are also willing to talk. Reasons could be that, on the other hand, at present, Iran would be talking from a point of strength, which we have seen that they have been allowed to take a charge levy from every ship which passes through the Strait of Hormuz, which was free, and internationally also it should remain free. But now there's some sort of carrot has been given to them. Okay, you can start charging. Some sort of positive has been given to them. It's sort of a sign of victory. But they would be talking from a point of strength because none of the objectives by the Americans or Israelis have been met, which they have started.
True. Now, but Iran will have to, in good faith, allow traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. We'll try and track that. The Asian markets have opened on green. We'll try and show that here on our screen, just trying to get it mirrored with our tech team. But Errol, this is truce at what cost, or is this a very uneasy truce? Is it very difficult to trust this? Because nobody has mentioned the time from when this truce is effective. Trump has just said, I've suspended all bombing, but nobody has mentioned a time, starting 1700 hours EST or GMT, because that's when the truce actually kicks in officially. Either side has not mentioned the time anywhere in any statement.
Yeah, that's true, and it's important to recognize that that's something that similarly happened with the original Iran and Israel conflict. When they kind of brought it to an end, Trump gave a closing window, and then he got very upset at Israel and said Israel went too far in that closing window. So I think right now there obviously are some loose ends that behind closed doors, not privy to people without that level of access, there are some perhaps last missions being carried out. And that does speak to the tenuous nature of this truce. It's a truce built, of course, on threats of annihilation. And under those circumstances, of course, you have to be wary of the trust you can build there. However, as both parties need to get things moving, and there are financial incentives for that to happen. Yes, there might be some fees being paid here, but the cost, of course, to the global economy, especially in Asia and Europe, where this really has affected it, is obviously much greater. So I think in the end, this has produced a deal-making opportunity, and it's pulled back from hostilities. So we can be positive at that, but it's right to question it because there is not a defined timeline. There will be a firm cutoff, but I think they're going to let the Israelis finish up what they want to do.
Right. Let's just quickly bring you up to speed with the updates, and we've got it here. I think this is the biggest positive, viewers, the fact that the Asian markets have actually opened in green. So markets would have opened in certain regions. Now, if you look at it, let's get up close and try and understand this. In New Zealand, Malaysia, Taiwan, Nikkei, that's Japan, even in other parts in China, Shanghai, Shenzhen, the Shenzhen Stock Exchange, Kospi, SETI, STI, CNBC, China Growth, all of them, Nifty 50, all of them have actually opened in the green. So the markets are also positively responding. Some of them have actually jumped more than 2,000 points in Japan, more than 1,100 points in Taiwan, and others also showing significant jump. Even the HSI going up by about 656 points there. So the markets have opened in green, which is a big plus. And because most nations and most countries would be, and businesses will be very heaving a sigh of relief. We've also got a statement that's come in from the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. And she says this is a victory for the United States that President Trump and our incredible military made happen from the very beginning of Operation, from the very beginning of Operation Epic Fury. President Trump estimated this would be a 4 to 6 week operation. Thanks to the unbelievable capabilities of our warriors, we have achieved and exceeded our core military objectives in 38 days. More on that tomorrow morning from Secretary War and Chairman Kaine. The success of our military created maximum leverage, allowing President Trump and the team to engage in tough negotiations that have now created an opening for a diplomatic solution and long-term peace. Additionally, President Trump got the Strait of Hormuz reopened. Never underestimate President Trump's ability to successfully advance America's interests and broker peace. Well, Many would say that the Strait of Hormuz was always open, viewers. Many would always turn around and say the Strait of Hormuz was actually free passage and deemed international waters, and now it no longer is. So who's won, who's lost here? And will you take President Trump's statement? Although there is the round of negotiations, and the Iranians, and they may be coming from a position of strength right now, they've also suffered a lot of losses. Their own programs, their own thoughts, their own plans have been also buried deep under the mountain, buried on a mound of rubble. There are reports which say that the entire highly enriched uranium is buried so deep that the Iranians will take decades to even retrieve it. And if they try to retrieve it, the Americans and the Israelis will be watching, Ambassador Prabhu.
Well, you very correctly described the recent developments as a big, big plus. And the significance of the ceasefire cannot be underplayed. Firstly, it prevents further escalation. Then it reopens the Strait of Hormuz. As, of course, you pointed out that it was always open earlier, but nonetheless, recently it was closed. And reopening is a very, very positive development. Then, of course, as you pointed out, it's a diplomatic pathway because the pause allows for negotiations to move forward on a workable 10-point peace plan presented by Iran, and discussions are expected to take place on this. Then, of course, it does provide some immediate financial relief because the announcement resulted, as you pointed out, in a very good development, the stocks going up in green and oil prices dropping. Nonetheless, we must not overlook the fact that it's just the ceasefires of a provisional nature, because both sides acknowledge that this is not a final peace treaty, but a temporary truce to prevent widespread destruction. And of course, despite the ceasefire, negotiations on the final details are expected to be challenging. Nonetheless, let's see how the US accepts Iran's 10-point plan.
Right.
And what does it say?
But Arul, that one must also see that President Trump was under immense pressure domestically. Oil had gone up to about $4.12 per barrel when I checked last evening. And there was also this move to impeach President Trump. The Congress was also mounting up the pressure. There was not people's support, which Trump himself accepted. Even now we are given to understand, and Axios is reporting this, that the 85 MPs who want to impeach Trump, this ceasefire is not stopping them. They want to continue to press on. So was that also, the domestic pressure, also a reason why the ceasefire happened? Or would you say that the window was 4 to 6 weeks? The Iranians are now wanting to sit on the table and talk, and there is enough pressure on both sides. How would you view this?
Well, I think there was...
Errol, Ambassador, just bringing in Errol Mokok on this. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Oh, well, in regard to the how it's being observed domestically, you do have to concede that the war is not popular, and that is why Donald Trump from the beginning knew this wasn't going to be a long, protracted war. When you look at the Congress, there's no fear of an impeachment. There's going to be 85 or 100 congressmen and women on either side who would impeach anybody over anything. I think more importantly, Trump did the most unpopular thing that every president doesn't do. Why did he do it? Because he cares more about the country than he cares about his party. He's not the party for MAGA. MAGA might have elected him, but he went there to be the president for the United States of America. And in the end, yes, it cost him short-term domestic support, but it looks like if he extracts himself well here, that will kind of die down. But he's not playing the domestic politics game here. This is completely geopolitical based, and it's cost him a tremendous amount of political capital domestically to do this. So he didn't do this for his own approval ratings or for the short-term benefit of the economy. Obviously, we've all seen what that's done.
Right.
He did this because of doing it the right thing. So I think it's going to work out, especially domestically for him in the long run.
Please allow me to push you a bit on this. How would you define and how would you outline this argument of a short-term pain for long-term gain? What has the world, US and Israel specifically, what have they gained out of this 40-day bombing and pummeling of Iran?
Yeah, very easy answer, and it's super clear. It's all about stopping the proliferation of nuclear weapons. If Iran confirmed got the nuclear bomb that they want, that they have threatened to use to wipe out America, wipe out Israel, rhetoric or not, they have stated that, then we're going to have proliferation throughout the Middle East. That means Qatar, that means Saudi Arabia, that means the Emirates, even Turkey under NATO's shield. Everybody would start trying to get the bomb. That makes Pakistan a very relevant player in supplying those nuclear bombs to backdoor deals. So ultimately, when you have Iran holding hostage the world economy, holding hostage vis-a-vis terrorist supporting networks, all sorts of areas of conflict, including attacking allies of both of our countries, then you realize that removing this cancer in that region, the short-term pain was worth the gain for everybody in the long run.
Do you agree, disagree, Sanjay Soy?
Yes, to a great extent, Errol, as I endorse the point. And yes, they're both long-term and short-term when we see from American point of view. You see, on the one hand, they've been able to destroy a lot, but on the other hand, if you see the thought process of Iran has changed, has become more hardliner. Earlier, Ayatollah Khomeini had always maintained a line that they will not take the enriched uranium up to weapon-grade uranium. They wanted to use it for peaceful purposes only. That is one point. And now they are talking of walking away from NPT. So that's a different thing. If they do that, then what Errol has said is absolutely right, that everybody has a right to make it, and there would be a catastrophe for the whole region. Second thing, in the long term, if you see, America, has it lost the moral ground? Have they lost a sort of leadership which they had earlier? Because none of the NATO countries supported America the way they used to support. Even England, which UK, which used to be first country to always support in any venture by USA, has also had resistance. Countries in the Gulf region are forced to support because they are under attack. They have not retaliated offensively, but yes, they are trying to defend themselves. So is the vacuum going to be filled by China? So there is a lot of things which are happening in the long term thing, but short term, yes, they have been able to destroy the war waging capacity of Iran. One more thing I would like to add here is that is Iran going to, if the regime does not change, in spite of all the damages, Iran will again rebuild because the thought process will remain same.
Right.
So ultimately, any regime which comes and which is ready to sign on dotted line by US, the things will remain same and they're not going to change. Anand.
Right. Let's just quickly look at what's the current status at the Strait of Hormuz, viewers. Now, if you have a look at this, just tracking on marine traffic, just look at that. I'm just going to zoom out a bit and see this. Look at the build-up that's happening on either side of the Strait of Hormuz. You see here, and you see all of the Persian Gulf is currently choked because these are all ships lying in waiting. Some are in movement, but there is no traffic here. There is no traffic that's happening here. There is a pile-up here. You can see there is a pile-up and a huge traffic jam here. There is traffic all across. And that's the global shipping routes which are active. But here, if you were to see, and as we zoom into the region, we will see that the Strait of Hormuz is actually seeing no traffic at all. And I'm going to zoom in here. There you go. This is what it is. You see? It's all a pile up here, pile up here. There's still no movement here. And till the time this movement starts, there will be no ceasefire. That's one of the conditions. The American condition is very clear. You've got to open up the Strait of Hormuz. Now, will the Iranians open up the Strait of Hormuz for the next 2 weeks without charging a fee? Or will they say, we will open it up only if we are allowed to charge the fee? So there are many smaller details or minutiae which will be looked into, and there could be a trigger, one or the other, which may tell the Israelis or the Americans, sorry, we don't agree with this, we're going to bomb you, we're going to start bombing again. Errol, would you say uneasy lies this truce? This is actually not a truce or peace, this is just a pause. And it can be unpaused at any point in time because neither side trusts the other.
I would say that's a fair assessment, and it's something that, based on the game theory of the interactions, both parties being wary would be, if they weren't, it would be bizarre. That said, just because something is difficult or unlikely at first glance, or that there's going to be consternation and deal flow problems, that's something that, of course, negotiations are for. And while Donald Trump has an interesting strategy of killing everybody and then restarting negotiations with the next group of people, that actually in history has actually had a lot of historical precedent of working. And so while it might be tenuous, it's tenuous based on, of course, the very reality that Donald Trump is looking for a solution. And it would behoove the Iranians to at least play ball more than they have, and that might lead to a much more favorable outcome for everybody. As we see in Venezuela, despite the uncouth behavior of it all, it's working out much better for the Venezuelan economy. And if you keep this up for the next 5 years, Venezuela will be a much richer country. So once again, you have the art of the deal there. Some people read history, some people write history. Donald Trump makes history, and right here I think is an example of that. Despite the deal being tenuous, that is the sort of region he works in, and I think he's going to find a solution.
But Venezuela is not Iran, Errol, or Iran is not Venezuela, and the conditions here are very different. The Iranians, unless this regime changes, unless the people say that they overthrow a regime that's not allowed an opposition, that's not allowed a different point of view, that embedded itself for the last 47 years, and work towards regional dominance. Now, given the fact that they had such facilities is beyond deterrence. The fact that they had ICBM is a betrayal of trust. The fact that they had enriched uranium up to 60% despite agreeing to not go above 4% is a betrayal of trust. So there is a certain level of roguish behavior that Iran can be blamed of, or not Iran, but the regime, the current regime that's leading it can be blamed for. But you allowed regime continuance. So nothing's changed. And Iran is somebody, and these are people, look at what they try to do with the Kuwaiti embassy, what they try to do in Turkey. There will be entities who will continue to foment this and at all points in time spite the Israeli. The next Jew will be on their target. The next American citizen will be on their target. And this is going to fester.
Well, they've been issuing those threats and fatwas and various statements and bellicose doomsday threats, but in the end, their entire navy has been sunk. 14,000 of their sites have been destroyed. Their religious supreme leader has been killed. Their top brass has been killed all the way down 2 or 3 levels. Anytime anywhere pops up, that capacity is degraded. Inside of their own country, they weren't able to capture their own American downed pilot because they can't even get basic air superiority in their own country. It would be the equivalent of a pilot crashing in Missouri and the Iranians extracting him from there. So destruction and complete degradation of the Iranian regime is a very real thing that happened. And regime did change. It changed vis-a-vis force. And while these people might be hardliners, governing a country as sophisticated as Iran from a cave isn't going to work. Now, what didn't work in Afghanistan was bombing the Taliban back into the Stone Ages, but they were already in the Stone Ages. Iran is a sophisticated country. Iran has something to lose, and these people have seen that America is willing to deliver that loss to them. So, yes, they might have not been able to change the core regime yet, but we're 33, 34 days in, and as they've fundamentally destroyed their currency, there is going to be internal uprisings that I think are going to naturally grow here. And with CIA and Israeli intelligence, perhaps they push towards that, because I do agree with you, it wouldn't be possible to have the absolute revolution we're looking for if that current regime stays in any capacity.
Right, gentlemen, to stay on with us, we've got Hormuz Fatakia of CNBC joining us this morning. The markets have opened in the green. There will be smiles across investors all across South Asia. In fact, the Nikkei has really jumped more than 2,500 points nearly, Hormuz. So clearly everybody wanted the Strait of Hormuz to open.
Morning, Anand. It's a huge sigh of relief indeed for the investor community, especially considering the battering that the global markets had seen across the month of March due to this war. The big monitorable, of course, remains oil prices, because after this announcement, both Brent and WTI have corrected over 14%. In fact, at one point, the WTI was down almost 17%. And although they still remain above the mark of $90 a barrel, you would still take a 90 or 95 any sunny day compared to 120 or 115 on the oil prices where they were yesterday before the announcements were made. And the GIF Nifty too, the Nifty futures are indicating a positive start for our own markets as well, almost a 700-point gap up as of now. And the important other trigger to watch today is going to be the RBI policy as well. The governor's statement will be awaited, the impact on the currency, the bond yields and so on. But as of now, the global markets are doing well. The Dow futures are surging, oil prices are falling, the other Asian markets have opened well, and it looks like most likely that we too open well and have a good trading session after quite a while.
But do you feel that by midday, if the Strait of Hormuz doesn't see traffic, if there is no actually progress in this entire ceasefire terminology, the markets may actually react to that? Or are the markets going to indicate that this ceasefire will hold for at least 2 weeks?
You know, the other important thing is that the devil lies in the detail. The markets will await a detail, yes, but considering the fact that they have been so oversold, they have been so beaten down, the Nifty was down almost 15% now from its record high levels. So any form of positive news will be latched onto by the market. Of course, the Strait of Hormuz is not going to see immediate resumption of traffic. Yes, there has been an approval from Iran that it will be opened for a period of 2 weeks, yes, but of course we'll see as details emerge on there. But today the markets will take that as a positive, that there has been a ceasefire announcement, the fact that oil prices are falling, and at least that is something that will ensure that at least for now that the market keeps going higher, at least for today. And then of course there are corporate earnings that are lined up for the quarter as we go ahead as well, so that will become the other important monitorable as well.
Just quickly, which are the stocks to watch out for, or which sectors will see huge positive jumps beyond just oil, that have actually suffered over the last 40 days?
A lot of these names, right? And since you mentioned oil, of course, the oil marketing companies will be the first ones. They were the ones that were down almost 25 to 30% in March, the HPCL, BPCLs and the kinds. It is a negative development, of course, for ONGC and Oil India, considering they rely on higher oil prices. But the other important stocks to watch out for are going to be the ones that are exposed to West Asia, the L&Ts, the KEC Internationals. Those are the ones that have projects ongoing over there in Saudi, in the UAE and all of these places. So those are the ones that you should be having on your radar. You should also be keeping stocks that have been beaten down, the large banking names that have been beaten down like the HDFC banks and so on. They will be the ones to watch out for. And of course, if there is a cool off in the bond yields today, they'll be having a positive impact on the PSU banks as well. So across the board, there are lots of stocks that should be on your radar today.
Right, Hormuz, it looks like a good Wednesday, and let's hope it stays a positive Wednesday all across, and especially on the markets, and they don't go green. There is actually what goes green is the signal at the Strait of Hormuz for passage. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good day. We'll try and connect with you again closer to the policy announcement, the RBI policy announcement later at around 11 a.m. this morning. Viewers, coming back to the coverage, there has been an indication that's come in, and CNN World is actually reporting this, that Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff, son-in-law Jared Kushner and Vice President J.D. Vance are expected to attend the talks that are scheduled to be held in Islamabad, although this will be officially confirmed only once President Trump speaks or if there's a press conference that's addressed. But Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, another question is, 2 weeks, is that enough for Qatar to start its production again, for Bahrain to open up its plants and for the LPG, LNG supplies to resume? Or is that not enough? Is that only enough to clear this entire traffic jam on either sides of the Strait of Hormuz?
You're absolutely right. This 2-week pause is not going to be enough to repair all the damage that has been caused to the oil infrastructure and to resume production. So it's just a relief in the sense that the Strait of Hormuz is open, traffic will flow. Nonetheless, I want to briefly refer to the point which my US co-panelist, Mr. Errol, mentioned about the fundamental cause which led the Trump administration to attack Iran. And that is the nuclear issue. Now, let me mention that I wish the United States had been equally alert and sincere when it came to the question of Pakistan making what they openly called an Islamic bomb. The Reagan administration had been given all the information by the CIA that Pakistan was making the atomic bomb, but the Reagan administration ignored it, and President Reagan kept on certifying to the Congress that Pakistan was not making a bomb, and Pakistan kept getting the annual aid package, the total package being $5 billion, which was a huge amount. So the US should have done the right thing. Now it's a case of locking the stable door when the steed is stolen, because these nuclear secrets have proliferated. They are in all parts of the Gulf. Let me mention that the head of the Pakistani nuclear establishment was Dr. A.Q. Khan, and President Rafsanjani himself said on record that A.Q. Khan had tried to sell him nuclear secrets. Of course, A.Q. Khan sold secrets to various countries, and the basic cause of this was that the US did not act strong enough, or in fact, it overlooked the Pakistani nuclear issue, and now we are facing this situation where the US is waging war against Iran on the nuclear issue.
Right, but the situation at that time is different. The equations with Bharat at those times were different. The considerations in the region were different. But at the end of the day, somewhere there is this entire messaging that the only hegemon should be the Americans. The Americans will decide who will have a nuclear bomb and who will not. The Americans will decide who can sell how much oil here and who will not. If the Chinese want to exert influence via proxies, if the Iranians want to exert dominance via proxies and themselves, that will not be allowed to be done, because one known hegemon is better than an unknown one. Now, not that everybody subscribes to this point of view, but this is another point of view that exists. But has that point also been achieved? Has that also been achieved, that military objective which Caroline Leavitt writes about? Sanjay Soy, what is that military objective? The Americans don't know where this HEU is, that is the highly enriched uranium. The Americans still don't know if they have decimated all of their missile manufacturing facilities. The Americans and the Israelis may know where they exist, but have they demolished them, destroyed them altogether? And if the 10-point plan says that the Iranians will insist continuing their ballistic missile program, continuing on their enrichment of uranium, plus charging a tax at Hormuz to all the ships that pass, then what objective has been achieved?
I would say, Anand, none. In fact, it is a sort of a reactive scenario at the moment, because regime change, yes, they claim they have been able to change the regime, but has the new regime ready to sign on the dotted line? Is their thought process different from the earlier regime? It has become, it seems they have become more hardliner. That is one point. Second thing, nuclear stockpile. Yes, they have been bombarded. They have buried deep in the debris. But the scientists remains. They can again rebuild. And with the regime still there, and they are now charging tax on use of Strait of Hormu. Some of the hardliners in the US, which I was discussing, that they are saying that Iran may use it again, less for development, more for making missiles and enriching the uranium. So that is another point of view. So at present, I think the trust deficit is there, but positive, I would say, I'm always hopeful that when the talks are on, some sort of communication are there, some and give and take are there. So I think hopefully some sort of progress should be made. The markets are indicative, and it is not only the users. It is the sellers also which need this peace, because the Gulf countries survive on the oil. What else is there? There is nothing else for them to survive. So,
but Sanjay ji, one of the aspects, let's understand the Israeli point of view. The Israeli point of view is that Iran posed an existential threat. The Israelis want that there will be no existential threat. If Iran wants a guarantee of no more war, then Israel will also seek that guarantee, that no more existential threat, no more proxies around me, no Houthis, no Hezbollah, no Hamas.
Absolutely, Anand. Absolutely. That's why there's some elements of Israel don't want a ceasefire. They want the military objectives to be achieved. They want regime change. They want nuclear stockpile to be destroyed. They want a restriction on ballistic missiles. So it is you are absolutely right, Anand, that this is an existential threat for the Israel, and it is a question of their survival. This is a small country, and when they are surrounded from all sides, from Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthi, and yes, Iran is there as a head of all these proxies. So they also want peace, and Iran also, it is not once but twice, and they have been attacked in the June, and now they also want long-term peace. So now they are talking of walking away from NPT so that they are able to develop a deterrence. These are things that are at present quite tricky. one can
They're
only
tricky
hope.
because the nation that you're going to engage with, or the regime that you're going to engage with, has not changed. The regime continues to employ its machinations. Errol, one of the arguments that the Americans and the Israelis made is that their intelligence had proof. They had such hard proof that the Iranians were going to not just enrich uranium but keep it and enrich it so deep under the mountains that you would have never been able to, when I say you, any nation would have never been able to reach them or bomb them out of utility. That would not have been possible, and this was now or never. But the regime continuancy Iran has been able to retain. Iran has now demanded the right to continue and pursue its ballistic missile technology. They are also saying they want to continue to enrich uranium. So how has America succeeded here?
Well, again, we haven't succeeded in changing their official demands, and everybody is no until they're yes. But America has succeeded in its military objectives. Now, if our military objectives are the only thing that we've succeeded, and the Georgetown School of Foreign Service is unfortunately disappointed that we didn't win the hearts and minds and change the regime, then so be it. We have set them back so substantially. We've turned these missile cities into tombs. We've turned Fordow and other the enrichment sites into unusable places that they would have to go there and once again expose themselves. They don't have superiority over the airspace of their own country. We can maintain that indefinitely if need be. So yes, we have some things to figure out. Yes, the two demands from both countries are not going to work for each other, but from a military standpoint, we have complete our objectives. Now, from a diplomatic standpoint, can we do it? And if we can't, are we willing to use more force? I think if they don't come to any negotiations, Donald Trump and Netanyahu will ratchet up the attacks and carry this forward. So I think Iran needs to be very cognizant of this, because regime change means a regime that's going to make a different decision. And right now, the points, their 8-point plan is not what we're going to agree to.
Right, but the regime change has to come from within, Errol. Do you believe that 2 weeks is enough for the people of Iran to come out onto the streets and enforce a regime change? Have the Basij militia, have the IRGC been weakened to the extent that they will not start shooting protesters point blank if a January-like uprising were to happen on the streets of Iran again?
Well, I mean, that's a very tough question to, of course, answer. There is a huge risk there, and it, of course, is going to depend on the Iranian people. Unfortunately, many of them were murdered by this tyrannical regime just recently, so they would be hesitant there. So unless we're able to get them weapons and or provide them some sort of support, I'm not sure that they're going to be as capable as we hope them to be. But we do feel that the IRGC has been degraded, and again, their supreme leader and these people are governing from far underground. It's very tough to maintain control over a city. It's only 33 days, 34 days in, but get to day 90, get to day 100, and you don't have any leadership. Eventually, we think that the dam will break, and the Persians, and of course, all the people in Iran will seek a new regime. What that is of course up to them, ideally.
Right, but the point is, in 47 years, despite trying to engage, despite multiple wars or conflicts, etc., and negotiations, what the Iranians or the IRGC and what this regime has done is only militarize, and militarize to a level with the aid and technology from the Chinese and the Russians and their own indigenous methods. They have wargamed only one fact: either we attack the rest of the region and dominate, or if we get attacked, how do we defend? Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, there's just update that's come through that President Trump, actually, New York Times is reporting this, that President Trump made 2 calls shortly before he announced a 2-week ceasefire with Iran. One with Field Marshal Asim Munir and one with Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel. This is what 2 officials have told New York Times, and the calls were made before or after 5 p.m. American time. What are the Pakistanis doing here? How is it that they've got so much of credit and so much of legway into this entire conversation? They were supposed to be messenger boys, but now they're getting credit for brokering this peace, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal.
You rightly term them messenger boys because they are only carrying messages from Trump to the Iranians. They are not really playing the role of a mediator. They are not making any sort of substantive proposal on their own to bring this war to an end. Now, there are basic hindrances. The Saudi-Pak Mutual Defense Treaty certainly makes the Iranians a bit apprehensive of the role that the Pakistanis are playing. And then again, the Pakistani attitude towards Israel is not at all helpful. Israel, let us not forget, is a major party in this conflict. Pakistan has neither recognized Israel nor does it have any sort of diplomatic relationship with it. So Israel continues to be very, very suspicious of what the Pakistanis are doing.
Right.
And let's not forget, even if President Trump is proposing a peace plan, I think Netanyahu could take steps on his own to keep this war going on, because I don't think that the Israelis think that their objectives have been fully achieved. So let's see how things pan out. At the moment, yes, it's a good development if some sort of a ceasefire is there for 2 weeks and that there is some possibility of a peace deal being worked out, though the positions of the United States and Iran remain so far apart that it's not going to be so easy to bridge them.
Right. Sanjay Soy, do you believe America's military objectives have been met and Iran's ballistic missile plans, the entire nuclear plans, they have all been programmed, they've all been pushed back by decades? And can there be any stringent monitoring or enforcement? The larger question is, and if you were to see these visuals, somehow viewers, the elation on the street is not as much as one would expect it to be. If you were to see the pictures, the celebrations are quite muted. People are waving the flags, but they are not dancing with joy. They are not celebrating like we have seen the Iranians celebrate in the past. Sanjay Soy, so is it because they are afraid that if they step out, they may have bombs rained on them? Or is there an undercurrent which says, now that these bombs have stopped raining in the sky, we perhaps would want to wave a different flag very, very soon?
In fact, yes, I would to some extent agree with Aaron. Some of military objectives have been met, not all. IRGC capabilities have been degraded, but they have not been destroyed fully. The missile making capacity has not been destroyed fully because the know-how remains. And on the other hand, Russia and China can always resupply them with the machine and know-how to make them re-establishment. Nuclear stockpile has been buried but not destroyed. So these two military objectives, but with the weakening of IRGC, you are right, Anand, that will the people against the regime rise again?
Yeah.
They are looking for him. America is trying to arm the Kurds, which are though in one corner only, not that they don't have much, but gradually, ultimately in different parts of Iran, US would be looking for uprising and against the regime. And with the weakening of IRGC and their focus on rebuilding and their destruction of infrastructure, I think they are trying to work on these lines while using this 2 weeks transit. But
right.
Iranians also tired. It is not only US which is maybe using this time to rebuild and to re-establish their arsenal. But on the other hand, also Iranians also have seen the onslaught for last 4 weeks. The people have suffered. They've seen a lot of destruction. Their refineries have been damaged. The roads, the bridges have been, rail communication has been damaged. So they are also looking for some peace. I think it is both sides would be looking for peace, but will it happen by the hardliners on both sides? That's $1 million question.
Right. We've got to take a break and we'll come back with some takes that have come in from various experts across the world. But the proxies have gotten active, viewers, and I'm just going to try and see if we can call this out here on our screen. The Islamic resistance in Iraq. So the proxies have called out, the proxies have called out, and as we take a break, this is a proxy, the Islamic resistance in Iraq, and we've just got this flash. They have come out and said, announces a 2-week suspension of its operations in Iraq and the region. So this is an IRGC proxy coming out and saying, we are stopping our operations in this region, the Islamic resistance in Iraq. The point is, viewers, that the proxies are announcing this very clearly, openly, underlining the worries that the Israelis have also had, that the end of war should not be that nobody will attack Iran. It also has to be the other way, that Iran and its proxies will not work towards creating and posing an existential threat to Israel. More on that when we come back after a short break. Stay with us. Namaste, Jai Hind and welcome viewers. It is indeed a good morning. We may say that for the rest of the world as a 2-week truce seems to be on the cards. Now, in this war or in any war, there is never a victor, but there will always be those who will feel vanquished. There will be those who try and project that they have won, but at the end of the day, war costs everybody. And in this case, the people who are neutral, the nations that were not even involved in this war, have perhaps hurt as much as the nations that were in this conflict, in this war. Into its 40th day, just hours before the deadline, both sides announced that they are going to cease and desist for at least 2 weeks. Uneasy lies this ceasefire, viewers. But is there a positive impact on the world markets already? Is there an impact on certain factors? Most importantly, here on this very special broadcast, while we get you all the messages and the proposals, etc., from either side, what President Donald Trump is claiming, what the Iranian regime or the IRGC is claiming, what will be the proposal, or will all this be now thrashed out over the course of the next 15 days? The most important aspect, and we're just calling it on our screen, is this Strait of Hormuz. Is this Strait of Hormuz, and we have to understand whether or not we see traffic right through this passage. Right now, there is no traffic. Right now, the Strait of Hormuz has got ships on either side, here and here, all waiting to pass. More importantly, there is a huge concentration of ships on the Iranian side at near Bandar Abbas. There is a concentration around Ras Al Khaimah and in the Abu Dhabi, Dubai region. There is a concentration even here around Fujairah, and they all want to pass through the Persian Gulf. This is not going to heal in 2 weeks, but the moment traffic starts, there will be nations that will be heaving a sigh of relief, because a lot of them, especially in South Asia, are Namaste, Jai Hind, and good morning. Plenty of updates coming through, but the big line, the top headline, viewers, at 8 a.m. this Wednesday morning is that there is a possibility of a ceasefire. There is a possibility of a pause. There is a possibility that the Strait of Hormuz will be open for traffic over the next 15 days. There is a possibility that both US, Israel, that grouping, and the Iranian regime representatives may sit at a neutral venue, possibly Islamabad, possibly by Friday, to thrash out a deal that could perhaps guarantee lasting peace. But there also remains a possibility that the trust deficit is so vast that this ceasefire does not hold. And that's why we say it's a pause. It's not a cessation of hostilities for good. It is just a temporary hold back. And they're saying it's also conditional. It's conditional from the American side on the fact that the Iranians allowed traffic through the Strait of Hormuz in an act of good faith. It is conditional from the Iranians that there will be no more of their facilities that would be attacked while these talks are going on. It is conditional upon the Israelis being convinced that the proxies of the Iranians will not target them, even if Iran doesn't fire ballistic missiles at them directly. So there are a lot of ifs and buts, but this morning the markets are opening in the green in Asia because nobody wanted the war. Peace, cessation of hostilities gives the possibility of the Strait of Hormuz being opened and the energy crisis being shed for a lot of nations who have been suffering over the last 35 to 40 days ever since this pounding happened. So these are the 10 points that the Iranians have actually sent across as a 10-point proposal this morning. Whether or not all of this will be acceptable, President Donald Trump has already said all of this is not acceptable, but it is still moving in the right direction at a time when his approval ratings are the lowest and gas prices in America are at the highest in his term. Let's go and take a look at the 10 points. First, organized passage via the Strait of Hormuz. Organized means that the Iranians will start charging a fee for every ship and share that revenue 50-50 with Oman. Iran says they're going to rebuild using this fee, this collection. End to war against the resistance axis. But if it is a resistance axis, so shouldn't the war be ended from both sides? What's the point of a resistance axis if there is not going to be any war going forward? So will Iran also submit and commit to ending, ceasing, desisting all hostilities and posing an existential threat to Israel? We have to wait and watch. The third, withdrawal of US combat forces from the region. The Iranians want Americans to shut down all bases, pack up and leave. Leave from Kuwait, leave from Qatar, leave from Bahrain, leave from Saudi Arabia, leave from Oman, leave from Dubai or the UAE. Will America accept this? More importantly, will these countries accept it? Fourth, safe passage protocol for Hormuz with Iran control. Is it going to be acceptable to all the other nations of the Gulf? That's the biggest question, and will they agree? So a lot of these positions are quite maximalist and it will be thrashed down. Full compensation based on official damage estimates. Who will compensate whom? Because billions of dollars of aid, etc., and monies that were supposed to be for development have gone towards military prowess and military infrastructure. So can this regime be trusted? Lifting of all primary and secondary sanctions. That's the sixth condition. The seventh condition that's come through. Release of all Iranian assets frozen abroad. So the Iranians want all their money. They want to start earning much more. If this is what they have built when they had sanctions and limited resources, imagine what they can do if they have got their purses back in their hands and they've got access to their coffers. Release of all. 7. 8. Ratification through binding UN Security Council decision. But this regime has been declared rogue and also a terrorist entity that is in control of Iran today. Will they even submit and commit to UN Security Council and respect those terms themselves? Will they walk the talk? These are big questions that remain as this 8-point proposal we put. Oh, they got 2 more points. The 9th point is acceptance of nuclear enrichment. This is exactly why US and Israel went and bombed Iran, because they were enriching uranium. So how will they accept? It was supposed to be 4%, they had gone up to 60%. Now, termination of IAEA Board of Governors resolutions. So that means the IRGC is trying to say we will continue to build ballistic missiles. We want more money to continue to do that. We will continue to enrich uranium, and you should not secure the other side of the Persian Gulf, and we will control the Strait of Hormuz. This is an outright maximalist position, viewers, that the IRGC and the Iranians are taking right now. Is this going to be acceptable? Or is it just a pause that's been made to get them to the table and where things thrashed out? And if it is not thrashed out, does that mean there will be a resumption of hostilities? Is this just a period to see whether IRGC and this regime can be trusted? Or will there be a change, a churn that will happen within Iran moment the bombs stop raining from the skies? Tara Kartaji and Ambassador Ashok Sajjan are with us this morning. Namaste. Good Wednesday morning, at least for the markets. And if you've got your stocks and if you've got your investments, you may be looking at them and say after 40 days, they're finally going back up. Otherwise, you'll be looking at this region and say, oh, when the traffic starts in the Strait of Hormuz, my spirits will go up. Or will you turn around and say, I don't trust Trump, I don't trust the IRGC, this is not ending so soon. Ambassador Ashok Sajjan, are you going to speak candidly, or are you going to be the perennial diplomat? Good morning.
I was a diplomat 10, 12 years ago till I was in service. After that, whether it's on your channel or otherwise, I've been speaking very candidly and very frankly.
Yes, you.
So let me put it this way, and this is what I said, Anand, on your channel last evening, that Mr. Trump does not have any easy options. So he has taken the best out of the worst option that was available to him. That is to go in for a temporary ceasefire. I had also said on your channel, Anand, last evening, that this 10-point proposal from Iran, although it does present a workable basis for negotiations. You see, all negotiations, Anand, let's realize they start with maximalist positions. The 15-point plan that Mr. Trump has put forward as far as Iran is concerned is also a maximalist position. But then we have to see, can it serve as a basis? I think this proposal is a much better proposal than the 5-point proposal that we had received from Iran earlier. So I said, some of these issues like, okay, you are saying that we should be provided guarantees of security. What about Iran providing guarantees of security to Israel? Iran providing also similar guarantees of security to the Gulf states, which it has been hammering for the last 40 odd days, and it has not done so in the past. So definitely it is a pause, it is a welcome pause. It will provide an opportunity to both sides to use this interregnum to, so to say, lick their wounds, if I may say so, lick their wounds and find what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and how do they go. I think both the sides are reasonably chastised, they are reasonably chastened, and then whatever follows, because we see that no direct talks between the two sides have been taking place so far. This will be an opportunity to start that.
Right. Tarakarta is with us. We also have with us Steve Gill, Republican leader. Good morning, Steve. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thank you.
We've just got an update, and I'm going to check if we can put it out here. AFP has put this out, that President Trump has told AFP that he believes China got Iran to negotiate. This is big. This is big, and we've also got further updates on that, and we'll put it on the screen. But this is breaking on AFP right now, where Trump has told AFP he believes China got Iran to negotiate, and we're getting just more news and more updates on that front, and we'll share that with our viewers also. This is just happening. The entity in the shadows. The entity in the shadows. Now, we're given to understand, again, New York Times has reported that China has actually played a key role in getting Iran to accept the ceasefire. Iran accepted Pakistan's 2-week ceasefire following frantic diplomatic efforts and last-minute intervention by China. China asked Iran to show flexibility and diffuse tension because they highlighted the huge economic setback that Iran would get and damage to critical infrastructure. Now, the Chinese have played a key role in building this infrastructure. Siddhant Mishra will be joining us with more updates on this. But we also have Ambassador Sajanhar, Tarakarta, and also Steve Gill with us. Taraji, the Chinese, they have been quiet. They started buying oil from the Americans, but now they've told the Iranians, listen, we've spent billions and we've invested. We've worked on our technology engagement with you and knowledge sharing. All of this is going to dust or going to be buried under the mountains if you don't cease and desist now.
Yeah, the Chinese role was always evident, Anand, because you saw that quiet 5-point proposal from China and Pakistan when he had gone. When the Pakistan defense minister had gone to Beijing, one point in that is very interesting. I mean, everyone said there's nothing. He says only commercial shipping through the Gulf. So that in turn ties with what Iran is saying, get the US out of the Gulf. So there is some kind of a coordination going on. China also gets to rebuild Iran, which is a lot of money involved. Who's going to pay for it? I'm assuming there will be a reparations committee. But the key here, which I'm not sure, I thought I heard someone reporting that the Washington has given Israel a red line. If that is true, then this ceasefire will succeed. If that Israel is the biggest problem here, Israel does not want to stop this war. It has not achieved its key objectives. So if indeed those red lines have been given to Israel, then this will work. Number two, if the equally, like you said very correctly, if the Iran withdraws from its position that all my proxies should be safe, I mean, who's going to agree to that? So if, again, like you said, Hezbollah and the others stop their attacks, but Israel is key here. Because it's a two wars in one. So if one war US is stopped, the other war has to stop as well.
See, what is Israel's red lines? Existential threat remains a constant issue for Israel. And right now, if you were to look at the tone adopted by the Hezbollah, the Islamic Jihad entities who are part of resistance entities in Iraq, and also the Hamas, the kind of talk, kind of rhetoric that they have put out on social media shows that they are only going to continue and pursue. So this is a rogue nation or a rogue entity that's backed its proxies, and it cannot be trusted. So we get to what Trump is saying, but China angle. Steve Gill, before I come across to you, a quick word from Siddhant, who's joining us. We've always spoken about this entity, the dragon operating from the shadows. China has huge investments in Venezuela that suffered because of Trump's intervention. This bombing and pounding of Iranian facilities is going to hurt the Chinese economic investments also, along with their knowledge and technology transfer.
Well, that's right. In fact, Anand, we have been saying this from day one, that Pakistan doesn't have the strategic depth to mediate. All throughout, what they were doing was to pass on the messages from the United States to Iran. And in fact, look, in this scenario also, what they did, they have taken strategic depth on Udhar from China and the United States. So without the blessings of the China, this mediation wouldn't have been possible. In fact, this was the reason that the other day Ishaq Dar visited China. In fact, he met Wang Yi. There was a 5-point agreement, perhaps, which was made public by both China and Pakistan on the ceasefire, so on and so forth. So they don't have strategic depth. They are an asset of United States CENTCOM, and everybody knows that, and in that capacity only they were operating, passing on messages from the United States to Iran. And you look at the peace plan, Anand, you know, the 15-point peace plan doing the rounds and Iran's 10-point peace plan. There are a lot of point of contention in those peace plans, right. Perhaps nuclear enrichment, US forces to withdraw from GCC, so on and so forth. So even the passing of messages were not done appropriately by the Pakistanis.
Right.
So you know, even they take strategic depth also on Udhar from China, from United States, from the Gulf countries.
No. If a field marshal and the nation's prime minister can claim victory after Operation Sindoor, we know what strategic depth they have, and if they are going to be hobnobbing with terrorists, then we know what strategic depth they have, and if they can't even draft their own posts for X, then we know what strategic depth they have. So let's not give the Pakistanis too much of credit here, but it's the Chinese. The Chinese have too much at stake, and they have come into play, and they have tried, and President Trump has actually had a small short phone call with AFP where he said Iran deal, quote, total and complete victory for US. He's further said total and complete victory, 100%, no question about it. And Trump has said in this brief telephone interview further that Iran uranium will be perfectly taken care of. Now, Steve Gill, we just played out the 10-point demand that the Iranians have asked, and what President Trump is saying. They are poles apart.
Yeah, both sides are dramatically far apart, and the Iranians' 10-point plan is what they've been demanding from the beginning. Yeah. And it's interesting that the English language version that they've distributed, that CNN and others have blindly put forward, leaves out the nuclear enrichment. The Farsi version includes the point about them keeping their nuclear enrichment. So they can't even keep their own story straight. President Trump has not agreed to that. There are numerous items that he will absolutely not agree to. And I think they're probably going to be closer to the 15-point U.S. plan down the road than they are going to be to the 10-point Iranian plan that they're claiming Trump has accepted, which he has not. As to the Chinese, I think President Trump has had an eye on the Chinese from the beginning. One of the reasons that Kharg Island has not been obliterated is because that is the main engine of oil revenue transport from Iran. 90% of their oil revenues go through there, and a huge amount of that goes to China. So President Trump has made it very careful not to hurt that composite of opportunity that would hurt China and maybe get them more actively involved. So I have no doubt that President Trump and the administration have been actively either keeping an eye on or in backroom negotiations with China from the beginning.
But in this case, if both positions are still maximalist and Trump believes the uranium will be perfectly taken care of, that means America does not want Iran to enrich uranium. Iran is wanting to enrich uranium, Steve Gill. So if the positions are still maximalist, how did the ceasefire happen?
Well, I think that President Trump wants this, flow of oil to continue. And again, I think the Chinese intervention there, because their economy is desperate for the flow of oil. As you mentioned, Venezuela is not making the oil available to them. President Trump has released some of the sanctions on Russia to allow some of their oil to flow into the world market. And although the U.S. has an abundance of oil, oil's a commodity. There's not Texas oil and Saudi oil and Venezuelan oil. The pricing is all going to be connected. And I think that President Trump wanted to give some global relief and provide an opportunity for the reasonable voices in Iran to have a chance to sit at a table and speak. I don't think we have a deal. I don't think we're close, but talking beats shooting at each other. And if we can get a temporary respite and find out if there is anybody in Iran who can speak for Iran and anybody in Iran who speaks, who can implement whatever deal comes to, and I think those are both still very big issues. Who can we speak to? Because we've killed 500 of the top leaders. And whoever we speak to, can they actually get their country to do what they agree to do?
Right. There is a lot of confusion about who's calling the shots within the U.S. WAPO has just now put out a story where they say Pete Hegseth actually misled President Trump. There are others who are saying that the Republicans themselves, within the Republican ranks, there was huge dissonance over Trump's decisions. President Trump's ratings have come to perhaps his lowest in the last 2 terms till now. Oil prices are at the highest. Steve Gill, what is true? What's happening? And President Trump claims military objectives have been met. If military objectives have been met, then why is he saying that he's still not taken care of the uranium? He still doesn't know where the uranium is. Wasn't that one of the military objectives? Iran is still firing ballistic missiles. Wasn't that one of the military objectives?
Well, the number of ballistic missiles being fired has dropped from about 350 a day to 3 or 4 a day. That's taken out a lot of their launchers and their ballistic missiles and their ability to develop and build more of them. As to the uranium, much of it is now buried under hundreds of pounds of rock and rubble. The ability to pull it out and enrich it further, and the scientists who were doing that, the facilities they were using to enrich the uranium have essentially been obliterated. So I think those 2 objectives have been achieved. The problem, again, is how do you move forward if you don't know who to talk to and if the people you're talking to can actually get something done? And oil prices, gas prices in the U.S. are not at the highest level that they've ever been. They were higher under Joe Biden just a year and a half ago. I paid $3.64 a gallon here in Nashville yesterday. So the prices are not as high as they've been. And I think we've already seen the oil prices drop $15 a barrel just since this pause has been announced. So I think things will head in the right direction. And if an agreement can be reached to open the Straits of Hormuz, and keep in mind, the Straits are international water. Iran doesn't have the capacity. Oman and the UAE and Saudi also say, look, though that strait is international water, nobody gets to charge a fee for going through it.
Tara Kartaji, quickly want to ask, and even Siddhant is with us. Siddhant, since we're talking about Pakistan and Shehbaz Sharif, was the Pak Prime Minister's ex-handle being managed by someone outside of Pakistan? Because it's a very interesting story that Forbes has done.
Yeah.
That this entire draft was shared, it was updated a minute before the final version was posted.
Yeah.
And it said draft Pak PM's message on X. That's what it said.
Yeah. No, there's nothing new in this, Anand. In fact, we know that he is a puppet prime minister. Perhaps Asim Munir is the man who is calling the shots here, and we don't know where that message came from. Whether it came directly from CENTCOM, for Shehbaz Sharif to put out that post, whether that message came from GHQ in Pindi for Shehbaz Sharif to put out. Perhaps we don't know, but all we know is that Shehbaz Sharif's team, Shehbaz Sharif himself, doesn't draft their tweets, their posts. They don't frame those messages which they put out on X. It is somebody else which is doing this service on their behalf, or rather sending them what needs to be posted. And perhaps today also this was again proven when the ceasefire was announced by President Trump. There were series of posts by Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, and in fact in one of the posts he also posted a message which says that it's a draft message. Then he had to delete that message.
Right.
So,
no, it was just copy pasted.
Yeah,
so
copy pasted. Right.
Technically, it was copy pasted.
Yeah.
Somebody had said, and they had said draft Pak PM. This is what it is. This is Forbes' story, and Tara Karta and Ambassador Ashok Sajanar. Pakistan's plea to Trump, draft exposed, looks scripted by someone else. Have a look at this. Forbes says, this is the top line. A message from Pakistani Prime Minister requesting that Donald Trump delay threats to wipe out Iran faced extra scrutiny when social media sleuths showed an early draft of his plea appeared written by an entity outside of Pakistan. Because it says, this is what it said. It said, draft Pak PM's message on X. Now, Ryan Grimm, he is the founder of Dropsite Substack, suggested this message was likely not written by Sharif, noting his own staff would not refer to him as Pakistan PM, and that the post could have been written either by the US or by Israel. It could have been even written by somebody else, we don't know. Other users questioned why the initial post indicated it was a draft and referred to Prime Minister in English, suggesting the message was not written by Pakistani officials. Sharif's office did not respond to a request for a comment from Forbes, but they have this is no longer there on X, but they have got a screenshot, a grab. This is what is important. Look at this. Draft Pakistan PM's message on X. This is posted on the Twitter handle of the Prime Minister. So clearly this has come from somewhere, or have they used an app or a tool? This clearly will not be Grok or Chat GPT for sure, Tara Karta.
At one level, the Pakistanis are pretty desperate because the attack on Jubail in Saudi Arabia, you had the Prime Minister assuring the Saudis that we will do everything we can to support you. They don't want to go into that mutual defense agreement at all. They don't want to go down that path. So that is one. Number two, what I heard yesterday was that Munir has been working the telephone.
Yeah.
Number three is that Munir himself is nothing in this conflict. It is obviously he is relaying through to someone else. There's Turkey involved, there's China involved, there's a bunch of people, and he's a kind of a go-between for all that talk. So this is extremely interesting. I mean, I really like. So I think with this, you're very clear that the actual messaging, actual negotiations are going on elsewhere. It's literally a kind of what shall I say? I don't know.
They're not even the poster, the post. They're not the post people, or they're not the messengers also, because their messages are also being drafted by somebody else. Also, Ambassador Ashok Sajanar, Trump actually called Munir. That's what reports say. They didn't call Shehbaz Sharif. So, what are the Pakistanis doing? This is one PR nightmare after the other, even if they're trying to an image correction. So the more they try and correct their image, the more it gets distorted. That's what it looks like. This is the word. See, look at this. There's an asterisk here, and it says draft, and it says Pakistan PM's message on X. So somebody has actually drafted this and sent it across, saying, and somebody who has control of Shehbaz Sharif's Twitter handle or X handle, or Shehbaz Sharif himself, has just copied and pasted.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Anand. You're very right. I think he has been, Shehbaz Sharif is just the cat's paw for the United States. We've known it all along. I don't think he has any, or Pakistan has any independent agency for that matter. They're just trying to collect some brownie points as a result of that. Meaning even as far as the drafting of this message is concerned, it should really read, even the English is wrong, it should really read Pakistan PM's message, not Pakistan's PM message. And so, Angrezi bhi galat hai. आनंद ये तो आप कहते हैं
Oh, this one.
Yeah,
This
Pakistan
it is Pakistan PM's message. It is Pakistan's PM message. So
अंग्रेजी भी गलत है इसमें तो मुझे कोई ताज्जुब नहीं है, but you know my
sir, then if Angrezi is also wrong, then either it is from President Trump's team because they keep writing which as WITCH. So we don't know whether it is President Trump himself who's drafted and said we don't know. But yeah, spelling mistakes have become a norm.
Yeah, give me half a minute and I will try to respond. Yeah, not on specifically on this, but you know what your other panelist said, Mr. Steve Gill, that you know Mr. Trump is so very sensitive about the interests of China that he doesn't want to do anything that would hurt China. But that sensitivity towards India has been nowhere visible since August of last year when he imposed 50% tariffs, penalty tariffs on India for importing oil from Russia, while India was not the largest importer, it was China who was the largest, which was the largest importer. So, you know, this is very revealing that the second point here that I would like to make is Mr. Trump is going to China. So he will really go in the position of having been a supplicant, being beholden to Mr. Xi Jinping, who has helped to get the ceasefire, because the whole idea of his going to Iran was capture the oil. All that oil is coming to China. I will then be able to control and dominate the energy scenario as I am doing as far as the Venezuelan oil is concerned.
Right.
So I think this is a very interesting twist to this. Yeah.
Correct. Now, whether or not Trump will go as a supplicant will also be determined whether or not this ceasefire holds, and also what are the terms of the ceasefire, because right now the Chinese are also not getting oil supplies. They are also forced to buy oil right now from the Russians or from the Americans. Steve Gill, Pakistan's PM message. So who's writing for Shehbaz Sharif? And what's Pakistan's stature?
There are some of us in the United States that wish somebody would write Trump's tweets instead of him, or at least break both of his thumbs so he can't tweet quite as quickly as he does. What's most interesting to me about this tweet, though, is it refers to efforts for a peaceful settlement are progressing with the potential to lead to substantial agreement. And yet this was grabbed and became Trump has agreed to the 10 Iranian points. This isn't close to an agreement or a reflection that an agreement has been reached. So I think that's probably even more significant about this text than the clearly indication that somebody else wrote it. It's not really a definitive statement in the slightest. So again, not only do you have the Iranians rushing out saying Trump has agreed to our 10 points, none of which are agreeable to him. It's the same points they've been making from the beginning with no acceptance. And that there are sources in Iran who are indicating that 12 or so of the 15 points that the U.S. is pushing are actually more in the agreement stance, and that something can be worked out if you get, again, the right people at the table who can then, hopefully, actually implement whatever agreement gets put in place.
Well, absolutely. Interesting points that many of our guests have actually highlighted in this post itself, the tone of the context, and of course the language and the grammar, but more importantly draft and Pakistan's PM message. All of that highlights that the Pakistanis are just embarrassing themselves trying to take credit, but every time they get credit they also end up embarrassing themselves further. Now Israel has actually backed America's decision for a temporary ceasefire in Iran, but says that ceasefire does not mean, and this is the latest that's just come, ceasefire does not include Lebanon. Now, so already conditions are being put and imposed. So this is the latest that's come in. AFP has put this out, and AFP says that Israel backs US decision for temporary ceasefire in Iran. The Prime Minister's office, or Prime Minister Netanyahu's office, has said that, but adds that ceasefire does not include Lebanon. So we saw the Hezbollah's post just a short while ago, and the Hezbollah was quite aggressive in its position. Israel is saying that if there is a near threat to me, I'm not going to come all the way as far as Iran, but I'm going to continue to ensure that Hezbollah don't pose a threat. Just like we acted against the Hamas, we're going to continue to act against the Hezbollah. Steve, will this be okay, or will this perhaps further convolute this entire ceasefire process, or complicate, if I may say that?
Well, the fact that as soon as the ceasefire was announced, you saw a barrage of missiles and cluster bombs targeting Israel, missiles targeting the other allies in the Middle East, whether it's UAE, Bahrain, and others. They were getting struck continuously after this deal was supposedly agreed to. And I think even more importantly, one of the provisions in the 10-point plan that the Iranians say has been agreed to means they will control their proxies and that their proxies won't continue attacks. So clearly, again, whoever's trying to strike a deal doesn't have the power to implement it within Iran. And I think the infighting in Iran is going to continue, and it's going to continue to be very difficult to decide who do you talk to, and if somebody reaches an agreement, can they actually empower themselves to make it stick?
Right, but the larger question, Ambassador Ashok Sajanar, is if Iran doesn't back off from its proxies, if it continues to arm and empower its proxies, Israel faces the existential threat. So you cannot say the resistance axis will, no one will wage a war against the resistance axis, but the resistance axis can continue to wage a war. What kind of a negotiation is that, and a condition is that?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think these are all the issues that will be hammered, that will be discussed at the negotiating table. And definitely, if you want to put a pause, if you want to put a stop, then of course Iran has to give this commitment first that the Hezbollah's rockets and missiles launches against Israel, they are going to stop, because unless that stops, how can you expect Israel? Israel is totally exposed. It's vulnerable to the attacks from Hezbollah just across its northern border, north of the Litani River. So definitely, this is a sine qua non of this even a temporary partial agreement going forward to some extent.
But the other aspect, the other question is also who is going to tell the Iranians, and how are we going to prove that this entire resistance axis ceases to exist, because that's a non-negotiable. So are we already looking at non-starters in this entire ceasefire negotiation? And Tarakarta, will Iran make good the damage that they have inflicted on Qatar and Bahrain, who are not even part of this entire exercise altogether, and forcing them to shut down their LPG and LNG facilities?
I think what this war has demonstrated clearly, Anand, is that Iran has no friends in the region. I mean, they've made such a, horror of themselves by supporting these hundreds of groups across into Syria, into Israel. I mean, you look at the map, there's the tiny Israel and there's this huge Iran, and they say, we will not accept the existence of Israel. I mean, what do you expect Israel to do? But I want to just raise one point, if I may. This whole nuclear enrichment debate was settled before the war. Iran had agreed no enrichment, IAEA safeguards, everything they had agreed with Oman before the war started. So now, what is the win here? I can't understand what was US objective, right? If I believe the Israelis, there was some leaks of the US proposal saying that the US and the IAEA will assist Iran in peaceful development of nuclear energy. Now, if that is still on the table, then we can go forward. Otherwise, right now, Iran is at a maximal. It's got the Hormuz, it's got nuclear enrichment, it's got everything that it wanted. So I'm hoping, because like everybody else, I want this war to end desperately. We are paying for it personally as we speak here. We are paying for war, and I'm tired of paying for this war. So let's hope that that IAEA aspect comes in terms of peaceful use of nuclear energy. We'll just have to wait and see.
No, and not just that. We are tired very fast. But have we considered this, that if this is what Iran was building, and this is what was Iran's capability, with sanctions, with so much of censure, if this is what Iran was doing, if 24 months down the line it had a cache of 8,000 ballistic missiles, it had 10 nuclear weapons, and it bombed Israel, and also bombed all the neighboring nations across the Persian Gulf and said, I want $2 million per ship because now I control Strait of Hormuz, what would we have done? At that time, would we have turned around and asked the Americans, what were you doing all this while? Why didn't you stop the Iranians?
That's a good argument, Anand, no doubt, but they did not. I mean, you remember at the end of JCPOA, the assessment was that they were keeping to the 3.3% enrichment thing. The Trump withdrew from the JCPOA for reasons unknown to anyone else but himself. So they did not have...
No, but Tarakarta, from 3 to 60% cannot be done in 3 years. So they were already enriching. They were already enriching. They have half a ton of uranium. Half a ton of uranium enriched to 60%. From 60 to 90%, it's a matter of weeks that they can weaponize. They already have the capability of making at least 5 to 6 dirty bombs, if not 10 nuclear warheads. So clearly they were not adhering to the JCPOA agenda. They fired 2 ICBMs at Diego Garcia. They said they are not making ICBMs. So clearly they are not adhering to the terms they have signed themselves. Isn't that proof? Isn't this proof? How does anybody trust this regime then? Friend or foe, I'm talking from a very neutral point of view. I'm just saying, how does anybody in that region, any of the monarchical kingdoms around of the region of the Gulf, trust Iran?
Oh, nobody trusts Iran. They are okay with Israel. In fact, Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Oman are okay with Israel. They are not okay with Iran. So, which I don't blame them in the least. So, but they started enriching only after the JCPOA was stopped. And they enriched to 60%, which is actually more or less acceptable under the NPT. They did not enrich to 90%. Till as of the time of date, we don't know. 60% also, I've spoken to people on the ground, 60% is also doubtful. But you're right, Iran was a threat. It was a clear threat in multiple ways. There is no doubt. And that strike at Diego Garcia was a shock. None of us knew that they had that kind of...
Correct. But now we know. Now we know. We know 18 months in advance. 18 to 24 months. There was a countdown clock, wasn't it, Ambassador Ashok Sajanar? Did Israel put the countdown clock, or did the IRGC put that countdown clock with the blessings of the Ayatollah? And what did that countdown clock point towards? August of 2027, didn't it? And what did that point go towards? Decimation of Israel by that day. And could decimation of Israel be achieved without this nation going nuclear and also absolutely ballistic with about 7,000 to 8,000 missiles? And what would that have meant for the whole world? Then,
yeah, you're absolutely right. And you see, I think we also need to give, pay attention to the fact that while Iran has been doing it, I'm sure it has not been doing it all by itself. It has been receiving all the support from China, from Russia during this particular, interregnum, even from the 12-day war that took place last year in June. Definitely, and even during the war, how has, the missile firings of Iran been so very accurate as far as Israel is concerned, which is so far away, whether it is Dimona, whether it is Haifa, Tel Aviv, or any of the other places? That is because they are receiving real-time intelligence from China and from Russia. So I think that also needs to be kept in mind. You look at also the fact that the resolution at the UNSC yesterday, the Bahrain UAE resolution, both Russia and China vetoed against it. And, even just one would have done, but they definitely wanted to demonstrate to the world that they are overtly standing with Iran as far as its actions are concerned. So I think that needs to be kept in mind. Whatever Mr. Trump might have said, that China has been very forthcoming in terms of getting this ceasefire. But that is because China itself has been suffering. It has been receiving, after sanctions was imposed on Iran in 2019, China is the country that has been receiving 90% of the Iranian oil from there. And it has not followed those sanctions. It has not abided by those sanctions. So definitely they have also had to had an important role to play in the development of the missile arsenal of Iran, as far as the the ballistic missiles, ICBMs, all these things are concerned. So definitely, I think there might not have been, as people have been saying, that there was no immediate threat to the United States or to anyone else. But I think this was a time when both US and Israel thought that Iran was at its weakest. Of course, there have been huge miscalculations that have been made by the United States also. They thought that the people on the streets who had been on the streets in January of this year, that they are going to rise up against the regime. That has not happened. But, this is something that we need to look at, that we need to sort of, consider and factor in as we go forward. Anand.
True, but in this case, okay, viewers, we are coming up to 8:42. In just about 15 minutes, the markets will start opening. By about 9:10, we should get the early trends of the markets. We'll track that very, very closely. Also, let's try and see within the next hour if there is any confirmation that comes from the Iranians about the Strait of Hormuz, because as of now, marine traffic shows status quo. As of now, marine traffic shows there are no ships moving, there is no movement that's happening. So, whether or not there is going to be any movement there over the next 5 to 6 hours, we'll have to wait and watch. But right now, there is no traffic. There is a traffic jam on either side, but at the Strait of Hormuz, there is no marine traffic. Just doing a quick check there, even as we get you more details. WAPO has done a story, that is Washington Post has done a very interesting story. These are the pictures, no traffic around the Strait of Hormuz. So ceasefire, there is no trust, there is no messaging that's gone. The Iranians have not said that for the next 2 weeks we will not charge anything in good faith. Will they come back and say that? And is that when traffic will move? And if there is no traffic despite ceasefire being announced, Steve Gill, does that then mean that Iran has total dominance over the Strait of Hormuz and they have every right to eke out every single penny that they can going forward? And has that dynamic changed there forever thanks to President Trump and Israel? So Strait of Hormuz has opened, but it's going to pinch the pockets of the world, especially South Asia. We'll talk about that, but more news coming through. The Washington Post has reported that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's boastful claims about the Iran war may be misleading President Trump. Officials say Hegseth exaggerates US successes, contradicting battlefield evidence. Steve Gill, agree, disagree?
Well, first of all, I think the ambassador was making great points that the trust factor can't be overlooked. And I'll say, as a lawyer, having negotiated a lot of contracts and a few diplomatic deals, the devil is always in the details. And even if both sides can reach a broad framework and a willingness to negotiate, you're going to get the lawyers involved doing the dirty details. And I say that as a lawyer. And that's where things really get off track sometimes. And I think there's a lot of room for disagreement. And the details are going to be very hard and intractable. I do think that the military success doesn't necessarily mean that, as the ambassador pointed out, that you're going to see the people of Iran take their country back. The besieged forces, the military, the police forces, they have all the guns. And I can march in the streets, I can hold up signs, I can protest and wave a flag. Right. But guns beat voices every time. And at this point, just as they executed 45,000 people to suppress the rise up of the people, I'm not sure that dynamic has changed at this point.
But that dynamic has not changed, but when we saw the celebrations in Tehran, they looked far muted. They looked like they had been exhorted to try and come out onto the streets, and there was a show, there were cars present there, and there were flags being waved, but those flags were being waved very tepidly. There was the energy among the crowd was very different to what we have seen in terms of celebrations in the past. So we have to wait and watch what has happened there. Even in Qom, they are preparing for the 40th day and also commemoration of the death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But Mustafa Khamenei remains quote-unquote unconscious or for a large part missing in action. So whether or not he will surface today, we'll have to wait and watch, or will they make another revelation? We have to wait and watch. Who's calling the shots within the IRGC? Many questions that still remain. Tarakarta, quick comment, even as we try and get closer to 9 a.m. We get you a report from CNN's Kristen Holmes in a bit. But yes, Tarakarta.
See, one reason that the ships are not moving is probably they're waiting for the insurance clearance. The insurance is not coming through yet, until the ceasefires. Absolutely. That is one reason. Number two is that whether they are actually, as far as I know, and I think what Mr. Gill said, is that they are going to levy some kind of a fee, or they waived it. We'll know as the ships pass through. But see, final question is, I still say Iran had agreed to an end to all enrichment in Oman. So what was this war about? If they're going to allow this, what did the US want? If it is control of the Hormuz, then we've still not seen the end of anything. Complete control of the Hormuz. And your question, I think that is very important. Is Peter Hegseth, Lindsey Graham, these are the group around Trump who've been pushing him towards this war. I think J.D. Vance and crowd are now weighing in. I wouldn't put it past them to be part of that tweet which you saw, which was attributed to Trump. And the J.D. Vance grouping wants an end to the war. There's apparently, from what I heard, there's also a large grouping within the military who want an end to the war. So let's see which, but Hegseth definitely has been the firing pin, shall I say, in this whole thing. So then let's see where this goes.
Right, we're just 11 minutes ago taking these tweets. It's a series of posts that's come from the Prime Minister of Israel. So it's not Bibi Netanyahu's personal handle, but the Prime Minister of Israel. This is what he has said. The Prime Minister's office, Israel Prime Minister's office. Israel supports President Trump's decision to suspend strikes against Iran for 2 weeks, subject to Iran immediately opening the straits and stopping all attacks on the US, Israel and countries in the region. Then further down, Israel also supports the US effort to ensure that Iran no longer poses a nuclear, missile and terror threat to America, Israel, Iran's Arab neighbors and the world. And finally, the United States has told Israel that it is committed to achieving these goals, shared by the US, Israel and Israel's regional allies in the upcoming negotiations. The 2-week ceasefire does not include Lebanon. So these are the posts that have come in from the Israel Prime Minister of Israel or Bibi Netanyahu's official handle, Prime Minister's office. And more importantly, this is polls of the opposite side, end of the entire spectrum compared to the Iranian 10-point proposal, because here it is very clearly saying in second post that Iran no longer poses nuclear, missile and terror threat to America, Israel and Iran's Arab neighbors and the world. So both sides still have maximalist positions. This they've been having for the last 38, 39 days. But on the 40th day, both sides agree that we will cease and desist for 2 weeks. Whether or not that will hold, whether this pause will be unpaused sooner than later, or are we going to move towards talks and perhaps a long-term solution to this, we have to wait and watch. For now, viewers, the Strait of Hormuz still remains shut for traffic. It's not yet open. Markets will open very, very soon, and we'll get to that when we see you right after a very short break. Stay with us. There has been peace that's been called. There are traffic on the streets, cars jammed on the streets. There is celebration, but to a certain extent, many would want to look at it with a pinch of salt, that while there will be thousands and perhaps millions who would come out and say this war ends, this also signal perhaps a certain messaging that will go across to this current regime. There was a big uprising in January, viewers. Will those people now have the courage to come back on the streets with perhaps the confidence that they're not going to be shot point blank? So these are questions which will remain. What will happen over the course of the next 60 to 90 days if 60 to 90 days if this ceasefire holds, if there is a cessation of hostilities from both sides? Will there be a transition within Persia itself? The transition from the Republic of Iran to what was erstwhile Persia. These are all questions that remain. There are people who are standing here they're standing with the flags. But do you see in the body language the kind of jubilation that was expected or celebration that was expected? So that's the reason why there is a little bit of hesitance in trying to say, are these celebrations forced, muted? There is no revelry. People are out on the streets. They are saying, thank God there is peace. But is this actually a victory celebration? That is something. Yes, there will be a group among the Persian public who will be supporting the regime, who will be happy about this, and who would claim that Iran has won and this regime has won. But the questions are, where is Mr. Mujtaba Khamenei? Why is he being AWOL all this while? Is there going to be a regime change or perhaps a different leader going forward? How much of information has Iran actually withheld? What are the losses that the regime has suffered, and at what cost will they be able to stand up again? Many questions, and we'll try and address all of that with our guests in a bit. But first, we've got news coming through. First on this celebrations, Akash, if you look at it, there are people there, but the flags are not being waved with the kind of zest or fervor that one would have expected. They seem to have all come out, or have they been exhorted to come out? These are all questions. There's a lot that can be read from pictures. And we've also got, Akash, are you there with us? All right, we'll go across to Akash in a bit. We've got more news coming through. The 2-week ceasefire plan, more news coming through. The 2-week ceasefire plan, there has been peace that's been called. There are traffic on the streets, cars jammed on the streets. There is celebration, but to a certain extent, many would want to look at it with a pinch of salt, that while there will be thousands and perhaps millions who would come out and say this war ends, this also signal perhaps a certain messaging that will go across to this current regime. There was a big uprising in January, viewers. Will those people now have the courage to come back on the streets with perhaps the confidence that they're not going to be shot point blank? So these are questions which will remain. What will happen over the course of the next 60 to 90 days if 60 to 90 days if this ceasefire holds, if there is a cessation of hostilities from both sides? Will there be a transition within Persia itself? The transition from the Republic of Iran to what was erstwhile Persia? These are all questions that remain. There are people who are standing here, they're standing with the flags, but do you see in the body language the kind of jubilation that was expected or celebration that was expected? So that's the reason why there is a little bit of hesitance in trying to say, are these celebrations forced, muted? There is no revelry. People are out on the streets. They are saying, thank God there is peace. But is this actually a victory celebration? That is something. Yes, there will be a group among the Persian public who will be supporting the regime, who will be happy about this, and who would claim that Iran has won and this regime has won. But the questions are, where is Mr. Mujtaba Khamenei? Why is he being AWOL all this while? Is there going to be a regime change or perhaps a different leader going forward? How much of information has Iran actually withheld? What are the losses that the regime has suffered, and at what cost will they be able to stand up again? Many questions, and we'll try and address all of that with our guests in a bit. But first, we've got news coming through. First on this celebrations, Akash, if you look at it, there are people there, but the flags are not being waved with the kind of zest or fervor that one would have expected. They seem to have all come out, or have they been exhorted to come out? These are all questions. There's a lot that can be read from pictures. And we've also got, Akash, are you there with us? All right, we'll go across to Akash in a bit. We've got more news coming through. The 2-week ceasefire. Namaste, Jai Hind, and welcome. Thank you for staying with us. Continuous updates coming through, but the biggest news is there is a pause on this 39-day war in its 40th day. Both Iran and the US-Israel combination, they have decided to cease and desist till the time talks, and give talks a chance. Uneasy lies this truce, viewers, but let's hope that it holds at least for the next 15 days. Most importantly, the Strait of Hormuz Will that be opened for traffic and for passage, giving important relief to most nations on South Asia, South and Southeast Asia, who are facing an energy crisis over the last 40 days. A quick check of the headlines at 9 a.m. this morning. After warning civilizational end, Trump backs down. Iran and the United States reach conditional ceasefire for 2 weeks. Strait of Hormuz to open up. Iran sets 10 conditions for ending the conflict. US concedes agreement on lifting of sanctions against Iran. No attacks on axis of resistance and continuance of nuclear enrichment. Iran reserves control over Hormuz to levy fee to ensure safe passage of ships. As one of its demands, Iran has agreed to share the proceeds of the fee with Oman. This has not yet been agreed upon. Disquiet in Israel over Iran-United States ceasefire. Reports claim Trump dialed Netanyahu to inform him of successful negotiations or the fact that there will be a pause. Pak PM Shehbaz Sharif boasts of mediation in Iran-US conflict, but technology exposes him. Sharif's Twitter post, drafted by US, leaves Pakistan red-faced. Asian markets trade in green on the back of ceasefire announcement. Oil prices slump but yet to reach pre-war levels. Republicans hail peacemaker Trump, but Democrats skeptical slam loss of face for Trump. Chorus for his removal continues as Americans pay price of war. Conditional ceasefire reached. Focus now on in-person talks. Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff could be the ones to hold talks with Iran in Pakistan this Friday. Pakistan plays host to Iran-US talks to finalize conditional truce. Tehran confirms meet in Islamabad. 15-day timeline for a permanent solution. Pakistan gloats, but is China the real mediator? Trump says he believes China was involved in pushing Iran to the negotiating table. Well, with little over an hour left on his self-imposed deadline, US President Donald Trump stepped back from the edge on Tuesday, announcing a 2-week ceasefire with Iran after a direct appeal from Pakistan's Prime Minister and also the military chief. Trump said that the decision to suspend military action came following conversations with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif of Pakistan and Field Marshal Asim Munir, who asked him to hold back the strikes planned for Tuesday night. Minutes after Donald Trump's announcement, Iran accepted the ceasefire deal. So what does this mean, viewers? One of the first aspects, and we need to understand this, is that there is a threat, and the threat was of imminent destruction, huge amount of damage, and perhaps counter-attacks that could have only set matters up the escalation ladder. But it's moved from a threat to a pause, an uneasy pause, but yes, high stakes, brinksmanship as a diplomatic tool by Trump sets dangerous precedent too. That is he going to do this every time now? Is this the new norm with the Trump administration? The second aspect, as we move on, Trump loses more than he gains. That's what it looks like on the surface, because he agreed to a ceasefire on Iran's 10-point terms, accepts veto over ship passage. But we must say, viewers, that this is what it looked like. But as of now, the Americans don't seem to have accepted or agreed upon this. Both sides hold their own positions but are agreeing to sit across the negotiation table, sit down and talk about it. The next part, Hormuz, heart of the deal. Strait reopening will determine whether ceasefire holds or collapses, and a lot depends on the Iranians, because the IRGC, if it controls Hormuz and has to act in good faith, that it is not hostile towards the non-participating nations in this war. So this is very critical. Tactical pause, not peace. 2-week window, a pressure valve for negotiations. This is not a resolution. Many believe, in fact, both sides believe, this could even give their opponents a chance to recalibrate. The big question, US has paused operations, but uncertainty over how fully Iran will comply, because Iran under the IRGC cannot be trusted. They have violated agreements they themselves have accepted in the past. That includes the ICBMs and nuclear enrichment. Now, domestic pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu could shape if it continues to back the pause. Israel has already come out and said that this pause does not apply to Lebanon. They will continue their strikes on the Hezbollah. Pakistan's moment positions itself as a bridge to de-escalation, wins global brownie points or attempts to do that. But then, of course, the draft Pakistan's PM message embarrasses Shehbaz Sharif. So situations are dynamic, things are changing. More news coming through. Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the United States has told Israel they're committed to achieving these goals shared by the US, Israel and Israel's regional allies in the upcoming negotiations, further adding that the 2-week ceasefire does not include Lebanon. This is what we had put out on the Israel's Prime Minister's office. Akanksha now joining us with more. Yes, Akanksha, the Prime Minister's office on their X post coming out and saying that they will accept, but this does not include Lebanon. But the second post is more important because that underlines the fact that Israel's red lines remain, that Iran cannot have nuclear ability, it cannot have ballistic missile capability, and it cannot pose a threat to Israel or Iran's Arab neighbors.
And look, this is exactly, Anand, what we were talking about. If all parties are on the same plane, whether it is the United States or Iran, because Iran's side of the proposal for ceasefire is indicating that that should include their allies, particularly Lebanon. Now, as far as Israel is concerned, they've been very clear that they will destroy Hezbollah because it is Lebanon which serves as the launch pad for all the rocket attacks being directed by Hezbollah towards Israel, and more importantly, even all the cross-border militant activities that are being harbored by Hezbollah. And that is why Israel is making it amply clear that they will ensure that Hezbollah is completely decimated. At the same time, Iran has been pitching for a proposal where they are saying that if indeed sanctions are lifted from Iran, it should also include Hezbollah. So this is one prime concern which we have been talking about since the beginning. If there are going to be any proposals considered, any potential negotiations, will the US, will Iran and will Israel be on the same plane? Will they be aligned in terms of what their expectations are? And this, in fact, message that you've already put out there, the post coming in from Benjamin Netanyahu, has already indicated that they will keep Lebanon, particularly Hezbollah, out of this. More importantly, Israel has some massive milestones over here on the battleground. Remember, they've created a buffer zone going up to the Litani River, which is what they are not going to be willing to compromise on, Anand.
Right, we've got more news coming through. Akanksha, stay on. Israel attack has been reported in South Lebanon. Al Jadid TV reports that Israeli forces have shelled the town of Araghchi in South Lebanon. The attack comes after Bibi Netanyahu said that the regional truce between US and Israel and their allies does not include Lebanon. So they will continue to target, Akanksha, the Hezbollah posts. And we saw the proxies of the IRGC put out messages in Iraq and also the Hezbollah trying to celebrate a regime win. Iran and this resistance axis, they also have to cease and desist because war cannot be one-sided.
Absolutely, and we've already seen how Lebanon and in fact Hezbollah has been completely in support with Iran. The Houthis in fact jumped onto the bandwagon much later, but Hezbollah has been part of this war since the initial stage, since 28th of February when the war broke out. In fact, Hezbollah has been very vocal about how they do not recognize Israel's right to being an independent state. So for Benjamin Netanyahu to continue this war against a terror proxy, which as we all know is being propped up by Iran, is but understandable. What the US president has got to pacify the Israelis with regards to their own security concerns, we'll have to see. Going by the tempo at the moment, the momentum of the attacks, the IDF is very much continuing to attack Lebanon. The whatever is left of the dummy governance in Lebanon, they are of course very concerned about the mass
displacement that's taking place. They are saying that what Israel is doing over there is a war crime, the kind of mass expulsions of the already refugee crisis that's plaguing Lebanon. You have close to 2 million displaced Palestinians, in fact, in Lebanon as well. So there are a host of, say, human rights concerns there, but that as of now is secondary. What will bring this ceasefire to hold becomes extremely important, Anand, because this is what we've been talking about. Is Israel going to agree with the United States?
Right. But just quickly getting you some positive updates. We've got our guest joining us. The markets are opening in the green. I'm going to check if we can call this on the screen. Gold has gone up. Silver has gone up. Copper has gone up. So these are the positives. Let's quickly look at early this morning, even as the markets are just about to open. We should get gold has gone up. There is a change, a 2% upward trend. Silver has gone up by 5%. Copper has gone up by 1.79%. Crude oil has gone down. Clearly positives here. When it is red, it is happy thing. Crude oil has gone down. Natural gas prices have also gone down. So in terms of the commodities, there is a major shift or an upward trend that we can see, viewers. We've got our guest this morning. I'm just going to quickly just also get you another update on the rupee. The rupee also has gone up, viewers. CNBC TV18 saying that the rupee previous close was at 93. The rupee has opened stronger. It's at 92.64. So if the rupee has opened stronger, it is also welcome news domestically. Although for the exporters, the rupee getting a little weaker internationally helps them with their exports. So positive start here. The gold index up more than 2%, silver index up more than 5%. Ambassador Rajiv Dogra with us. We also have Shakid. We have Lieutenant General D.P. Pandey also joining us. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, both sides have maintained their same maximalist positions. So what's changed on the 40th day?
What has changed on the 40th day is optimism all over the world and a sense of relief that at least the threats of the maximum are no longer there. What happens after 2 weeks remains to be seen. But for the moment, there is positivity that at least missiles will stop flying between America and Iran. What Israel does is a different thing. Israel can't be happy. Yet there are a couple of things which are worrying. Number one, by agreeing to virtual Iranian control over Strait of Hormuz, which it seems might happen if this is the way the negotiations go on in Islamabad from Friday onwards. America is going to give up its long-held position that there should be free passage through international seas. That is a wrong precedent. Also, for example, for Malacca Strait or anything that China claims is its own waters, even though they are international waters. So there is a big if on whether it was a wise move to start the war over something that everyone agreed was not necessary, principally the Strait of Hormuz. Secondly, it's going to be a long worrying point also for the Gulf states, because earlier they also thought that they had equal rights over the Strait of Hormuz. That apart, the fact is that there has been no gain for America in terms of its guarantees over security of Gulf states. Gulf states do not view America any longer already as a provider of their security. They may be looking for alternatives. As far as Pakistan is concerned, let it not celebrate too much. After all, it was also a facilitator for Nixon-Kissinger's visit to China in 1971. And by 1972, Pakistan was no longer Pakistan. Bangladesh had been created. So I think acting as a messenger does not get us great credit except for some amount of momentary congratulations. and maybe some more IMF rollouts and so on. But there's no guarantee for its internal problems, which are huge and many. As far as India is concerned, it has sat out, and it has there has been some domestic criticism because of that. But I think on the whole, it is better to sit out a situation which is tricky, which is unreadable to some extent, and which has some very mercurial characters like Trump and Netanyahu. So India did well to keep its distance from the negotiations. Let's see how it goes in the days to come from Friday onwards.
Right. We've just got CNBC TV18 reporting this. I'm trying to open it up, but the website seems to be stuck. That the airports ERA, that is the Airports Economic Regulatory Authority, that is the airport tariff regulator, has actually announced a 25% reduction in parking charges, flight landing charges across major airports for 3 months. So that's what ERA has announced. So that's another significant development. But would everybody agree with your point of view, Ambassador Rajiv Dogra? Because IRGC and this regime has shown that it cannot be trusted. What the last 39 days have shown is that IRGC, trying to appear benign, was actually weaponizing itself to a certain extent, where it would have been beyond the reach of this entire region along with the world within 18 to 24 months from now. The IRGC said they are not making ICBMs, but they have ICBMs. The IRGC said that they are not pursuing nuclear technology, but they had weaponized weaponizing nuclear tech, but they had enriched their uranium up to 60%. So these were threats. The IRGC even now controls the Strait of Hormuz. How could the Saudi nation or the Arab nations ever believe that Iran would remain benign forever? The day they were stronger and they had perceived heft, muscular heft, military heft beyond the reach of the region, they would have come and exercised themselves. So they were acting to be benign, but they could turn potent or rogue any moment. That's another thought process. So if their technology, their infrastructure, etc. has been set back by decades, is that not a partial objective met? Yes, many may fault Donald Trump of saying it's ill thought. You've not had any thought process. Even the message that's come out, Lieutenant General Pandey from the Pakistan Prime Minister's handle, was drafted by the Americans and Israelis. So were they desperately trying to see some kind of an off-ramp, and they used their perennial doormats or puppets, the Pakistanis, and that leadership to figure that out? That's another way of looking at it. General Pandey.
Yeah, so I really hope what Ambassador Dogra said about 1971, Pakistan was a peace negotiator, and it broke down within a couple of months. I hope it happens again this time. So one is very, very, we may blame the IRGC for everything what they are doing. But please understand that the American stooge Pakistan has also developed nuclear weapons. They have been the holders of terror infrastructure, which has gone around. Every attack all over the world has led back to Pakistan. But coming on to this whole point of what is actually going to happen, actually, yesterday evening only I had said very clearly that ceasefire is on cards in next 12 hours. Right, because the language of Trump when he posted on his tweet was indicative of something which is going to develop, and it was very clear that this will happen. But what is a challenge is that now the way Americans are going down actually on this path is indicative, or the future is going to be far more worse for the region. Why? Because now all the people who are the proxy warriors, the asymmetric warfare, asymmetric fighters, Iran is actually now going to be far more emboldened to be overt in what they want to do, because they have actually looked into the eyes of the most powerful country, which had the entire region backing that country along with Israel, and they have been able to persevere, survive. So in case Trump had just called off and said, I have been able to achieve my aim and I am moving away from the region, and thank you so much, situation was different. Right now it looks that they are begging to have an off-ramp. And they are giving points, they may be putting an maximalist agenda on the table, and as Iran is doing. And this is a major challenge because now the region is going to turn. The second facet, which while I'll agree with Anand that they've been able to destroy the nuclear facilities and everything, maybe by setting them after a couple of decades, by about a decade or so. But once this gets over, you imagine Russia and China, and there will be other people who will Russian equipment, technology to empower Iran. This region is now going to get altered, not the way Americans wanted or the Gulf countries wanted. It is going to get altered significantly differently than what was imagined. So proxy warriors remain. You will find within a couple of years, nuclear Iran back to its nuclear agenda. With even if they say today, no, we are not going to pursue ballistic missiles and everything. There is no way. The Americans don't have the capacity now to carry out monitoring or supervising the region or Iranians. And UN has got no say. IA has got no say. When the Chinese and Russians are going to come after it. So I am looking at a world that unfortunately, in case they stop now at this stage, the way they are stopping, things are not going to be in favor of Trump and his team.
Right. We've just got big good news. The markets have opened, viewers. Nifty up by more than 700 points in opening trade. Sensex is up by more than 2,500 points in opening trade. So big relief or perhaps positive news. The markets responding very positively. We'll reflect that on our screens in a bit. But there is more news. UN Secretary General has welcomed a 2-week ceasefire. Antonio Guterres has welcomed this announcement of a 2-week ceasefire by the US and Iran. He's also expressed sincere appreciation for the efforts made by Pakistan and other countries involved in facilitating the ceasefire. Or Shakit is with us, Deputy Director at Jewish Virtual Library. There is some confusion, Or Shakit. One is when President Donald Trump puts out the 10-point proposal or that's been put out by Foreign Minister Araghchi, does that mean America has accepted the 10-point proposal? Or does that imply that based on this proposal, the entities are willing to talk to each other?
Well, one thing to understand about the Middle East is that there's always a gap between what is said publicly and what happens behind the scenes. The fact that the Iranians are now flexing their muscles and showing allegedly a symbolic win of deterring the enemy and so on is not necessarily an indication of what's going on the ground. I am aware that prior to the announcement of this pause, and let me just stress that this is not the end of hostilities. This is just a tactical pause for all of the sides to regroup. There have been assurances that have been given to Israel that the U.S. would stress during the negotiations aspects such as removal of the nuclear enriched material. I speak, of course, of the 441 kilograms that was enriched to 60%, a halt to enrichment, the elimination of the ballistic missile project, and more. So this is not something that has ended. I would be very careful about announcing the end of the hostilities because one can just look at the gaps between the 10-point plan of the Iranians and the 50-point plan of the Americans, and if both sides are not willing to come toward one another, it is very clear that the gaps between what is presented by the Iranians and what is presented by the Americans is not something that is that is possible to be bridged.
Right. So if what you're saying has to be taken at face value and accepted, because both sides have one's got a 15-point proposal, one's got a 10-point proposal, but it is President Donald Trump who's put out the Iranian proposal. But the Iranians have not put out President Trump's proposal. So, or Shakid, is something, are we missing something here? Or is this perhaps Trump's way of trying to say, this is what the Iranians are saying and not what is being claimed by others? What's the confusion there?
Well, I saw that Trump on Truth Social put out the letter signed by Foreign Minister Araghchi. It published some of the details as it pertains to Iran, contrary to what was published earlier by allegedly the Iranian authorities. There was a change in tone. It was much more formal. It was much more simplistic. And he talked about some baselines, but in a much more egalitarian language. So I don't think that the so-called 10-point plan, as it was published by Iranian sources, Iranian media, and so forth, is necessarily a reflection of what was agreed upon. You are already seeing gaps, just like you suggested earlier, between the specificities as it pertains to the Strait of Hormuz, whether Iran is able to receive tolls from passage, or whether it is a return to normalcy to the pre-war situation. So it is indeed possible that some of the language has been vague for the sake of constructive ambiguity, and that the actual litigation of the specificities of the core demands of the Americans and the Iranians, for that matter, is something that will be done in Pakistan in the next couple of weeks or so.
Right. Ambassador Rajiv Dogra, markets open in the positive, but more importantly, there is relief across Asia. But this relief could also be temporary, because so far the Strait of Hormuz is still not open. And if Iran says, I am going to demand a fee starting now, even in the period of ceasefire, then that's not fair to the nations who've suffered for the last 39 days, and that is not going to be acceptable to US and Israel. Even the Gulf, even the Arab nations on the Persian Gulf. Yes.
You're right about the markets. It's a knee-jerk reaction. It's not a considered reaction, nor a long-term reading of the situation that might evolve over the coming days and weeks. The second thing is a point that General Pandey had made about China and Russia. I think that is a very valid point, that China and Russia have now become even more important than they already were in the Gulf region. Gulf meaning both Arab and the Persian side. What they actually got out of their role behind the scenes in these reaching of some kind of an agreement so far remains to be seen. But I'm sure they would have extracted their pound of flesh from America. The other thing is whether it is a cause for concern for countries in the region, the point that you had raised, and also for countries in Asia in general. Yes, because it's only a pause. It's not a definitive sort of ceasefire that is in place. And a ceasefire which is fair to all sides or acceptable to all sides can only come about depending on the character of the negotiators. Here, two of the American negotiators, Witkoff and Kushner, there are doubts about their credentials because they had been accused of deception earlier in Geneva by Iran, and that black mark on their credentials has not been erased. So the introduction of Vice President Vance is certainly a step forward, and let's hope that his views prevail and his diplomatic style in negotiations succeeds. But again, there are question marks, just as there are question marks over Iran that America has, or more particularly Israel has. So it's a tricky situation. And Pakistan, I don't think, I'm not casting any aspersions or doubts on Pakistan's role as a venue, but Pakistan has never been known to be sincere to even its closest friends and allies, including America, especially its role over the years in Afghanistan. So there are more questions than answers at the moment, but for the sake of the region, for the sake of Asia, I hope that somehow they reach an agreement over the next few days, which leads to a ceasefire which is longer term.
Yeah, but in this case, are you all right for Iran to continuing enriching uranium? Are you okay for Iran to continue with its ballistic missiles program, Ambassador Rajiv Dogra? Are you okay for the IRGC to continue to try and hold sway and say that, no, I want to exact traffic out of the Strait of Hormuz and continue to control it?
Well, that's Iran's position at the moment. What happens as a result of negotiations remains to be seen. But for the moment, Iran seems to have the upper hand. And its 10 point, that's another issue that you had raised in between, the 15 points and the 10 points. The fact is, Iran has rejected 15 points some time back. So as far as Iran is concerned, the only points that are on the table that are to be negotiated are 10 points, which is a normal diplomatic practice, that you start with your position and then over the period of days or hours, things may change, some things may get diluted. So your issues about
but there has to be some sanity and some red lines, because Israel has its red lines very clearly. If Iran continues to say no war against a resistance axis, so what is the resistance axis doing if there is no war? That means there should be no resistance axis. It's as good as trying, it's a misnomer. There is no Warsaw, but NATO continues to push eastward, and that's all right. So it's the same reverse which is happening here. There is nobody should attack Iran, but Iran can continue to torment Israel and continue to push up its proxies to try and torment Saudi Arabia and also create flux in the region. Iran will continue to start its weapons program and put all the Arab nations under its watch. This is going to trigger another arms race in the Gulf. That's what's going to happen. Every other nation will now want to become a nuclear nation.
Well, exactly. That's a chicken and egg argument. That should we still have the resistance axis? Should we still continue to have attacks on Lebanon and not expect resistance axis to get activated? So that is a kind of chicken and egg argument that negotiators are supposed to address and resolve to the best advantage of the world. Whether they succeed in doing that remains to be seen. But both sides have their position, and both sides will put their maximal position on the table when they meet in Islamabad.
Right, we've got more news coming through. The key bridge between, even as we stay with the Sensex, which is going up, 2,500 points already up, but a key bridge between Saudi Arabia and Bahrain has now reopened. King Fahd Causeway, a key bridge linking Saudi Arabia and the island kingdom of Bahrain, has reopened this after an hour-long closure to a possible incoming fire from Iran. The King Fahd Causeway Authority said in its announcement on X that vehicle traffic has resumed. Now, this is a relief because this was one of the first targets which many believed Iran would attack if its bridges and if its key energy installations and connective routes were bombed by the US-Israeli combined at the end of the deadline. So the King Fahd Causeway is the only link between Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, and that could have been damaged or attacked by the Iranians, and that's why, as a precaution, an hour before the deadline it was shut down, but now thankfully it's open. So that's the update that we have. We've got the markets coming through at this point. The markets, quickly, if you can look at the markets, some relief that's being seen, General Pandey, in the markets, going up, shooting up, actually racing, both the Nifty and the NSE or the BSE, if you were to look at it, the Sensex, 2,565 points up. That is the Sensex. Nifty is also up by nearly 750 points. Good sentiment, hoping that this peace lasts. But IRGC cannot maintain these maximalist positions because those are red lines for the Arab nations and Israel alike. Ballistic missile technology, nuclear enrichment, and of course these proxies. General Pandey.
Yeah, so firstly, Sensex are, I don't want to use the word, but these are all players of making money by using sentiments at that point of time. And I think right now the sentiments are positive, but how it will play out, we have to see. The issue about the maximalist agenda, which I think Ambassador Dogra is so very correctly articulated, I don't want to add anything. But the fact remains that are the Arabs happy with it? What are they party to this entire process of peace? Is it because America is now tired? When did it change? And when I look at inflection point in this change in American perception and behavior towards the operation is when this whole process of evacuation was carried out or rescue operation was carried out of a failed botched operation which took place in Isfahan. So, while there will be very good English spoken about by Trump, Vance, Pete Hegseth about the entire taking out of the two pilots which were about 100 miles apart. But I think that was one point when those losses have occurred and they've realized that they will not be able to take out that 440 kgs worth of uranium. They have gone on this part of looking at ceasefire. But, I will not like to trust Americans or Trump now. In this 14 days or in past about 10 days of this whole thing, there is something which will be brewing within Iran, right? And that will be possibility of a change of some